"Captain, they've entered the forest." The shout echoed through the dense canopy. I paused for a moment, then gave the order with unwavering resolve. "This is our final chance. If they make it out alive, they'll cross into the Order of the Temple's territory, and we'll lose them. Surround the forest. Don't let anyone escape." The 3 warriors at my side responded instantly. "Yes, sir." 2 vanished into the foliage like shadows. The 3rd stayed, close as we pushed deeper into the woods. The Iron Legion had grown rapidly in recent years. Our numbers swelled daily, each recruit trained according to their potential. Among them, one name stood out: Taze, our commander at Tinaver. At his coming-of-age ceremony, he challenged all comers and defeated me in a fair duel. He'd grown even stronger since, always accompanied by his colossal ebony wolf. Across the continent, few could rival him. Others followed similar paths. Rufus, the dwarf boy, displayed prodigious earth magic control, overwhelming seasoned warriors despite his young age. Like Taze, he too had an ebony wolf at his side. Then there was Garrison, the half-deer child, who wielded a spear with finesse that exceeded his years. Though I never liked spears, I couldn't deny his skill. Talents like them kept surfacing, especially in the Great Forest. I hadn't seen all of them personally, as my duties kept me stationed in Tinaver, but our reach continued to grow. Economically, the Legion thrived. As adventurers and mercenaries, we had a monopoly over the forest's resources. Demand outpaced supply. Our power surged. 2 months ago, our leader, Aoi Hiroto, Supreme Commander of the Iron Legion, sent us several letters. They carried both triumph and warning. The good news: an alliance with the Kingdom of the Dragon King, sealed with detailed diplomatic protocols. The bad news: Rigor had been ambushed. The attackers belonged to a mercenary group called Storm of Tyranny, including elite mages and even a northern emperor, an almost certain death sentence for most. But Rigor killed them, both of them. Before dying, the emperor swore vengeance, vowing to exterminate every last member of the Iron Legion. Rigor believed the rest of the group might follow through. He described them in detail: a demonic mage with a red staff, an elf with silver hair, and an old warrior. He warned us especially about the mage. His firepower was said to rival Rigor's. We began investigating melees. If they truly came there, it would confirm their intent. They did, disguised as wandering mercenaries, but their identities matched Rigor's description. The helmet was missing, but the red staff was unmistakable. A war council in Tinaver reached a unanimous decision: hunt them down before they could reach Tinaver. We couldn't risk them attacking first. Rigor's instructions were clear: eliminate or contain them, but only strike if certain. I led a hand-picked unit and set out. But things went awry from the start. We injured and captured the demon mage, but my attack on the red-staffed mage failed spectacularly. My Tuki-enhanced longsword of light, a blade forged by dwarves, shattered against his stone armor. A chill ran down my spine. I went for my dagger, aiming to end him swiftly using the Northern God style. He was dazed and opening, but the elf intervened, conjuring a wind spell that forced me to retreat. Then all hell broke loose. Spells tore through trees. Blades clashed. Dust and light filled the forest. The elf weaved ice walls and gusts of slicing wind. The mage launched fire and earth magic without pause. The old warrior fought like a demon. Still, our coordination as legionnaires began to turn the tide. The mages lacked defense once we forced them apart. Victory was within reach. Until Laws appeared. "Stop fighting," he shouted, stepping between both sides, pointing at the elf. "That girl is my daughter." Silence. We all knew Laws. He was one of us, leader of the Search and Rescue Division after the Fatoa teleportation disaster. He had spent years searching for his wife and daughter. And now, he found her, his daughter, among our enemies. The girl's eyes welled with tears. Her voice trembled. "Father?" Weapons lowered. We could contain them. We didn't have to kill anyone. But then it happened. A sword flew from the trees, Northern God style. It struck Laws clean through the neck. A perfect kill. He collapsed, eyes wide, never to rise again. I froze. Who threw the blade? Why didn't I call for a ceasefire sooner? My heart pounded with guilt. The elf stared at her father's corpse, unmoving. Then the temperature dropped. Everything, ground, air, trees, froze. She screamed. Her howl shattered the silence. A wave of frost surged outward, freezing some of our warriors instantly. The battle reignited, but we were no longer winning. She unleashed unrelenting fury. The terrain turned against us. Every step was a hazard. Eventually, they escaped. We failed. I chased them until I reached a rise. In the distance stood Melishan, the holy city. I stopped. We couldn't pursue them there. With clenched fists, I issued the bitter truth. Cease the search. This mission is a failure. POV, Luke Noto's Grey Rat. I jolted awake, drenched in sweat, sword already in hand before I realized I was no longer dreaming. I bolted down the corridor of the royal palace toward Princess Ariel's room. Derek, I barked. The mage beside the door startled awake. In a heartbeat, he understood. He flung the door open. A figure was already inside, hooded, blade drawn, creeping toward Ariel's bed. The princess, still sleepy, hadn't noticed. I moved. My enchanted boots, a gift that amplified my speed, propelled me forward. My sword met the assassin's, sparks flying. He tried to dodge, blade flashing, but I was faster. Stone lance, Derek chanted, conjuring a spear of rock from the floor. The assassin leapt aside, but that gave me my moment. I lunged, my blade sinking into his chest. He choked, convulsed, and died. Guards burst in too late. The princess, now fully awake, walked over, eyes wide and glistening. She reached for my hand and whispered, "Thank you, Luke." I knelt. "Just my duty, princess." Derek eyed the window, muttering, "How did he get in?" Then he turned to me. "How did you know?" I hesitated, masking the unease growing inside me. Just a feeling, I lied. But deep down, I knew the truth. He had warned me. And this was the third attempt on Ariel's life. She was only 11. I was 12. But there would be more assassins. If we stayed in Azura, she would die. I looked out the window into the star-strewn night sky and clenched my fist. I had to convince her to leave. I had to protect her, because she was my princess, and I was her knight. It had been several months since we descended into the depths of the Dragon King mountain range to test the Emperor-level spell, Earthquake. The ground-shaking display had been a monumental achievement, one that still lingered in memory like an echo of raw power. Since then, we had journeyed across the Sanakia Kingdom, passed through the Kika Kingdom, crossed the plains of Chiron, and brushed against the borders of the conflict zone. Now, at long last, we approached the jagged silhouette of the lower jaw of the Red Dragon. Just beyond it lay the Wishiru region, our gateway into the Azura Kingdom. This time, our travels had been brisk. As planned, we made no extended stops in any of the kingdoms. I made a mental note to return to Sanakia in the future to visit Fendrel, Irina, and their child, but that would be for another time. Nothing significant occurred during this leg of the journey. We continued working under the banner of our adventurer party, Gods of Combat. Most missions were led by Aerys, Skoll, Idar, and occasionally Lilia or Aisha. Only when large threats or high-level enemies were involved would Ghislaine and I step in. It was perfect training ground, no better teacher than real combat. One night, around the fire, Idar mentioned they were on the cusp of reaching S rank. An impressive feat still. For me, ranks meant little. What mattered was how they grew, how they survived in a world where power often dictated life or death. During our travels, word of my promotion to North King had spread. Naturally, warriors eager to challenge me appeared. Some were skilled, none were a real threat. As we drew closer to Azura, I noticed increasing chatter about the Fatoa teleportation incident. Flyers still listed Paul, Zenith, Hilda, and Rudius as missing. Options were growing thin. They could have ended up on distant continents like the Demon Realm or the Celestial Lands, been imprisoned in remote dungeons. Or perhaps they were already dead. Aerys had already come to terms with her losses. She'd known about her father Philip and grandfather Soros since our time with the Iron Legion. Though her bond with her parents had been lukewarm, Soros' death had struck a chord. She didn't grieve openly. Instead, she funneled her pain into relentless training, sharpening her resolve. Lilia, on the other hand, began to plan for the worst. With no news of Paul or Zenith, she decided that if nothing surfaced by the time we reached Azura, she would return to her father's dojo in Mil Bots, a region beyond Wishru. She wouldn't abandon the search, but she needed a home. Fatoa was no longer an option. Her father ran a dojo, teaching the water god style, and as she spoke of it, Lilia revealed something that shook me to my core. She met Paul there. He had fled the Nodo's household and sought training at her father's dojo. When her father offered him Lilia's hand in marriage and future leadership of the school, Paul ran, then entered Lilia's room that night and raped her before disappearing. The revelation disgusted me. I couldn't fathom how she had later chosen to serve him, let alone marry him. She explained that when she was injured protecting the princess and expelled from the palace, she sought employment with Paul. If he refused, she planned to blackmail him. But over time, she believed he had changed. To her, he became respectable. To me, he remained a selfish, womanizing predator. The stories of his charm were one thing, but this crossed every line. I'd once executed a man who attempted to violate Lilia, and now I had to live with the knowledge that the first man to touch her had done so by force. She forgave him. That forgiveness confused and frustrated me. Even Ghislaine, who once adventured with Paul, had never witnessed that side of him. At least it spared him a death sentence in my mind. He was still Aisha's father and Lilia's husband. But my disdain remained. If he was dead, I consider that justice. When I asked if Aisha would stay with her mother in Mil Bots, Lilia wasn't sure. We'll decide when the time comes, she said. As for my own path, there had been progress. My control over fire magic had grown significantly. Within the carriage, piles of grimoires, scrolls, and books had become part of our daily life. I'd absorbed nearly all high-level spells from the Dragon King's kingdom, and recently mastered Absolute Zero, the Emperor Tier water spell. I now stood as an Emperor-class mage in earth and water magic. I'd even revisited Lightning Step, tapping into my demon eyes for better control. Though I failed again, I didn't lose consciousness, an improvement, a sign I was getting closer. However, Saint-level barrier magic remained elusive. Perhaps it lacked the urgency I'd given my other studies. Gravity magic, too, showed no tangible results, likely too complex to learn on the road. And like everything else, progress was slow due to the sheer number of skills I was juggling. Even so, the mere fact that I was advancing in multiple disciplines at once, magic, sword styles, Tuki, was a testament to my potential. But something had to change. When I reached the Sword Sanctuary, I would shift focus entirely to Tuki. Magic would take a back seat. If I wanted to ascend beyond limits, I need to refine each pillar of my strength at the right time. Meanwhile, our strange little band had become more tightly knit. Ghislaine, once aloof, now spoke often with Lilia. Their bond surprised me, but proved beneficial. Some of their late-night talks, in fact, made our own nights more eventful. Aerys viewed everyone differently. Ghislaine was her mentor. Idar, a rival. Skull, a fierce companion. Aisha, a younger sister. And Lilia, her advisor. Her relationship with me, though, was complex. She wasn't subtle about her feelings. They only grew stronger over time. Whatever Lilia was telling her behind the scenes, it seemed to be working. Aerys had mellowed. She no longer lashed out in rage as she once did. Despite being one of the weaker members now, she trained harder than ever, fueled by a burning ambition I deeply respected. Aisha saw the group as family. She clung to Aerys and me, though she adored everyone. Her growth in magic was astounding. I began teaching her new elements. She absorbed knowledge like a sponge. Idar had become one of my closest friends. He trained with Aerys regularly, their rivalry accelerating both of their growth. He also guided Lilia in the water god style. She aimed to reach the advanced level, even without natural talent. Her persistence was admirable. Skull, ever loyal, remained close to all, except Lilia, who still seemed uneasy around him. Perhaps his monstrous aura unsettled her. The rest treated him like a large, lovable beast. Somehow, this motley group, a mother and daughter, a warrior and her apprentice, two ambitious travelers, and a ranking beast, had become something special. I loved Ghislaine. I respected Idar as a brother-in-arms. I cherished Aerys and Aisha, my gifted disciples, and I appreciated Lilia's wisdom and warmth. Despite the constant danger, the ambushes, the close calls, this was one of the happiest periods of my life. The same way I felt when I built the Iron Legion in the Great Forest. I dreamed often of returning there, of building a home with Ghislaine and Verdia, surrounded by my friends and disciples. Would Aerys accept Lilia and Persina? How would Ghislaine and Verdia get along? Who among the wolves, Skull, Tazes, or Rufuses, was strongest? Could Aisha one day surpass them all? Thoughts like these filled me with warmth and curiosity. Still, the Iron Legion remained in the back of my mind. I trusted them, but I couldn't help but worry. If Meles had made a move against them while I was away, at best, the Legion would thrive in my absence. At worst, war was already brewing. Soon, we would part ways. Lilia, and perhaps Aisha, would remain in Milbots. Idar would stop in ours. Ghislaine and Aerys's path depended on what we found in Fatoa. If things were stable, they might stay behind. If not, they'd follow me to the Sword Sanctuary. Lost in thought, I was pulled back to the present by Idar's voice. There it is, the lower jaw of the red dragon. Towering peaks stretched across the horizon like the jaws of a sleeping beast. The wind howled down the mountainside as we gazed ahead. Azura waited. I exhaled slowly, gripping the reins of the carriage. We were almost there.
Hey, everyone. If you enjoy my quantum audiobooks, you can support me by becoming a Patreon member. Your support helps me keep creating, and you'll get exclusive perks. You can also access my audiobooks directly through Google Drive. Check out the link in the description. Now, let's get started.
Our carriage continued its path towards the lower jaw of the red dragon, one of the two natural passages that connected the southern and western regions of the central continent. The landscape around began to change gradually, the green plains giving way to more rocky and deep terrains. To avoid unnecessary risks, our route took a large detour to skirt the mountain range. But there was one person in the group who thought this detour was unnecessary. We don't need to detour around these things. We have Rigor and Ghislaine with us. We could cut straight through those mountains, declared Aerys, crossing her arms and huffing in frustration. I just observed the conversation while practicing my control of barrier magic. Her stubborn gaze was fixed on the huge winged creatures that lazily circled the mountain peaks along the way. The red dragons, despite their apparent calm, were known for their ferocity when provoked. Ghislaine shook her head in disapproval. We couldn't. I already fought once against a single wandering red dragon before becoming a sword saint, and even though we were among 6 swordsmen, 2 of us died. Her firm and non-negotiable voice made Aerys frown. But Rigor could, if he were alone, right? Insisted Aerys, now seeking some validation for her idea. Aisha, who was listening to the conversation from the side, immediately supported. Yes, the master could, isn't it? She said with a sparkle of admiration in her eyes. Ghislaine fell silent for a moment, pondering Aerys's and Aisha's words. Then, she looked directly at me before giving her answer. Perhaps. She seemed uncertain, which made everyone in the group turn their gaze towards me, waiting for my answer. I took a deep breath and balanced my head as I thought. I couldn't. Even I would get tired fighting hordes of those monsters. It's not just a matter of strength, but also of wear and tear in numbers. My answer made Aerys puff out her cheeks, clearly unsatisfied. Lilia, who had been silently listening to the conversation until then, interrupted. But didn't you fight the blue dragons of Meles when you were teleported from Fatoa? Her voice was calm, but carried a touch of curiosity. Ghislaine smiled slightly as she recalled the episode. That's why I say we couldn't. She looked at Lilia and then at the others. Aerys and I wouldn't have survived a prolonged fight against the dragons, let alone have managed to get out of that cave if Rigor hadn't split the mountain in half. Aerys, now recalling the event, broke into a confident smile. That's right. Rigger saved us from the dragons. They all retreated when he used the roar magic, she said with renewed enthusiasm. Idar, who until then had been just watching the conversation, spoke. They say the red dragons are even stronger than the blues. Even a single one is already classified as an S-rank monster, and they always move in groups. That's kind of impossible to get past, right? He paused and continued. On the other hand, their flight ability isn't as good as that of the blue dragons. That could be an advantage, but it doesn't change the fact that they are dangerous enemies. I crossed my arms, considering Idar's words before replying. Impossible it isn't. The 7 great powers should be capable. Maybe I could pass through if I fled any combat and focused only on advancing, trusting in my magic, but it would still be an unnecessary risk. After all, that's why there are the upper and lower jaws. Why take the risk of folly? My answer was rational, but Aerys didn't like it. She puffed out her cheeks again, this time without saying anything. She just crossed her arms and looked away, clearly annoyed. I smiled and said carelessly, "By the way, when we leave the mountains, I'll go back and capture a red dragon to take along." Idar's mouth opened in shock. Aerys and Aisha seemed instantly excited, and Lilia just looked at the sky with an empty gaze. Ghislaine also said with a smile, "Skoll is going to be jealous." Idar said, "How do you plan to carry a red dragon around? People already complain about Skoll. Did you know that the red dragons are symbols of disaster for all the nearby villages of the mountain range?" Rigger remained impassive. "Nothing you say will convince me. In the legends, Laplace tamed the king of the red dragons. Why couldn't I tame a normal dragon?" Idar looked at him with an empty look. Rigger continued, "Besides, I've tested these Mad Dragon King sealing chains several times. Anything that gets trapped in here for 2 minutes can't use magic, which nullifies its flame breath. Must be why they wanted to trap me with them." He picked up the green-color magical chains with a dragon carved along them. The treasure of the kingdom of the Dragon King that he stole after being ambushed. Besides, the sealing cannot be broken by physical force. In fact, I still haven't completely understood how it works. Putting it to use will be good to discover more about them. Idar gave up arguing. Aerys said, super excited, "That's right. Let's take one. Can I decide its name?" Rigger remembered the name of his adventuring group, Gods of Combat, and said, "Unfortunately, I already decided the name." Aisha asked with sparkling eyes, "And what is it?" Rigger fell silent. Lilia and Idar looked at him with a teasing smile. Until Rigger finally found out. "It's a secret until I capture it." Aisha looked at him with a suspicious look, but Aerys didn't suspect anything. It almost seems like their ages are swapped. How is this little girl so cunning? As we continued our journey, my mind began to wander to other matters. To a being who had not manifested for some time. Hitagami. He hadn't appeared recently, which was great in Rigger's opinion. He could make his decisions without being questioned several times if he was falling into some trap. In fact, all his advice until now had been merely practical to guide me along a path I probably would have followed anyway, which intrigued me even more. It was as if he was watching me and altering small details, things I probably wouldn't notice. Honestly, it would be better if he never appeared again. Eventually, I would investigate who Hitagami was and what his true objectives were. No matter how hidden he was, someone should know about him. However, for now, I had other priorities. One of them was convincing Lilia to let Aisha accompany me to the Sword Sanctuary. If my prediction about the strength of the Sword God was correct, then that training would last a few years, and Aisha would enter the period when physical training was more important. I wanted her to be there so I could properly teach her. Lilia wasn't sure about it, but I was gradually convincing her. It was just a matter of time. Currently, we were camped midway. A huge ravine stretched beside us, and there was a lot of snow. This was the last stop before leaving the mountains, and Lilia was cooking a dragon meat stew. Aisha, who was dressed in a fur outfit that made her super cute, looked curiously at Idar, who was demonstrating flow. He moved with the grace of a master, cutting the stone cannon, which Aisha had just thrown at him, in two with a simple movement. The cannon split in the air, falling into pieces of rocks scattered on the ground. Idar smiled at the little one. See, Aisha? The water god style is way cooler. We can even cut magic, he said, with a sparkle of pride in his eyes. Aisha seemed impressed. But another opinion quickly came from Aerys, who was by the side, with her arms crossed. Nonsense, the sword god style is obviously the best. Aerys said confidently, already demonstrating a new stance of her sword style for Aisha. Little Aisha looked alternately at both, not knowing how to decide. Both seemed so confident and sure that their style was the best, and their arguments were becoming increasingly incoherent. Meanwhile, Ghislaine was sitting very close next to Rigger. The two were beside Lilia, who was preparing the food. Ghislaine had a worried look on her face. She looked at him with a thoughtful gaze and asked softly, I'm fine living in the great forest, but will they welcome me back? Rigger shrugged, unconcerned about the question, and replied with a reassuring smile. Don't worry. You are my wife. Any opposition they might have is nullified by that. Ghislaine smiled. She looked at Rigger with a gentler smile before asking an unusual question. And when do you want to have children? The question caught Rigger by surprise. He fell silent for a moment, his eyes focusing on the distant mountains as he thought of an answer. Ghislaine watched him attentively, waiting for his answer. Finally, he took a deep breath and spoke with a slight hesitation. Maybe when we are more settled, when we return to the great forest. He looked at her and smiled. Ghislaine nodded. Indeed, we disbanded our group when Zenith got pregnant. It must not be very convenient to travel like that. At that moment, Lilia, who had been watching the whole exchange of looks and words with a discreet smile, rolled her eyes and said, interrupting the couple, Stop flirting. We're in the middle of the mountains. Rigger smiled, trying to hide his laughter. Oh, so you've never done that outdoors, Lilia? He teased with a smile. Lilia blushed instantly, shaking her head quickly. And no, it's not that. I haven't done that. I haven't. She sighed heavily when she realized that Rigger was just teasing her, and gave up. Rigger just laughed with amusement, while Idar joined the group, sitting beside them around the campfire. Aerys, who was still with Aisha, continued explaining, with visible enthusiasm, about the advantages of the sword god style for the little one. She demonstrated sword stances while Aisha tried to mimic her movements, albeit somewhat clumsily. Idar smiled as he watched the moment, sitting near the campfire with the others. I'm going to miss this, he said, with a slight sadness in his voice, but also with a nostalgic smile on his face. Ghislaine, upon hearing Idar's words, replied, Although Aerys would never admit it, she will miss you too. She never had anyone at her level to train her. When Rigger met her, she was already much stronger, and you were at an advanced level. Even after becoming a saint, you were still the closest she had to a rival. Rigger, listening to the conversation, added with a laugh, I also think you were the perfect punching bag. Lilia, who was next to him, couldn't help but laugh. Idar, however, frowned, confused. Punching bag, he asked. Rigger explained with a mischievous smile. Ever since I met Aerys, she trained with an intensity I've never seen in a child her age. In the dwarves' territory, on the way back, and even when we were in the Legion, no one could keep up with her training pace. But you were just right. You were a water saint, so defending was easy, and she also got tired faster than you did. Idar fell silent for a moment, reflecting on Rigger's words. Then he started laughing, shaking his head. All right, you're right, he said, amused by the memory. Lilia asks, Idar, are you going to keep the water god-style dojo as your residence? Idar says, That's right. When the Legion's influence reaches ours, the plan is that I already have some base there and help them with that, although that will probably take a few years. Rigger asks, How old is your fiancée anyway? Idar becomes pensive. According to the information I obtained in the Kingdom of the Dragon King, she must be close to her 3rd birthday, I think 14 years old. At that moment, Skoll, who was patiently sleeping beside the campfire, suddenly stood up and became alert. His ears perked up, and he looked into the distance with fixed eyes, a slight growl escaping from his throat. Idar immediately put his hand on the hilt of his sword, prepared for anything. Something wrong, Skoll? He asked, his senses sharp. Skoll turned his head and looked at Idar, shaking his head in confusion, as if trying to understand the reason for his own reaction. Rigger, seeing Skoll's reaction, said calmly, "If there was something, I would feel it. But why did Skoll react like that?" Lilia, who was also attentive to the situation, spoke in a soft tone, but with a slight touch of concern. "They say that animals are more sensitive to danger." Aerys, who was busy demonstrating a sword stance to Aisha, immediately stopped upon hearing the conversation. She picked Aisha up in her arms, carefully. Rigger, still with his senses alert, spoke calmly. "Well, if something approaches, I'll know. Don't worry." And so, as the night advanced and the calm of the mountains surrounded the group, everyone relaxed slightly. Perhaps if Rigger had investigated this phenomenon a little deeper, things might have been a little different. Maybe if they hadn't made this last stop, something could change. But Rigger couldn't feel the same as Skoll, in any way, no. That was something reserved only for beings of this world, a fear that arose from the depths of their souls. The group continued their journey under the scorching sun as Lilia recounted her experiences in the royal capital of Azura. Her voice carried a nostalgic tone as she spoke of the ruthless political games within the palace. "There are many princes and princesses, but the games in the palace are cruel. One by one they died. I don't know how many remain now, but the favorite to inherit the throne seemed to be the firstborn, Grabble Zoffin Azura." Rigger was about to ask other questions when suddenly his ears perked up, the hairs on his arms stood on end, and he looked in a specific direction. Instantly, the others felt the change, and their hands moved to their weapons. The reaction was automatic. They had learned to trust Rigger's perception, whose long-range detection ability was unmatched. Not even Skoll could surpass him in that. He stayed alert for a moment, analyzing. He picked up the presences with his keen hearing, and he could also sense the smell, then activated his demon eyes. His vision expanded, seeing the flow of mana in slow motion, each particle moving distinctly before him. He couldn't see the mana flow far away, but he could see a blur moving. After that analysis, he said, "There are two people moving along the same path as us, but I sense no hostility, even though they are laden with magical items. And by the way they walk, one of them is probably a warrior." The group relaxed a bit. Idar then commented, "They're probably travelers like us." Skoll probably sensed a powerful red dragon before. Skoll growled, as if in agreement. Ghislaine crossed her arms and nodded. "We can ask them about the Fitoa region. Since they're carrying magical items, they must be important, so they probably have some information." The group then continued their journey, but Rigger remained cautious. He thought to himself, "Well, I don't have any bad premonitions, but also no good ones. It must be all right." As they continued, the two travelers gradually approached under Rigger's watchful attention, who was walking outside the carriage along with Ghislaine, Aerys, and Skoll. The rest remained inside the carriage. When they were close enough, he noticed something strange. His gaze narrowed, and his demon eyes caught something absurd. What an absurd amount of mana is that? This guy had even more mana than the mage who ambushed him in the kingdom of the Dragon King. And besides, his Tuki was completely different from anything she had ever seen. It was then that he realized that only he continued walking. The rest of the group had stopped. The horses, too, were paralyzed. When he turned, he saw Lilia holding the reins of the paralyzed horses, her face pure fear. Her face was pale. He looked around, and everyone was in the same situation. Ghislaine was gripping the hilt of her sword so tightly that the blood had stopped circulating. Aisha, inside the carriage with Lilia and Idar, was clutching the warrior's sleeve and hiding her face, completely terrified. Idar, Aerys. Even Skoll was paralyzed. The wolf's hairs were completely bristled, and he didn't even dare to let out a growl. No one was breathing loudly. Rigger was extremely confused. He didn't understand what was happening. The travelers were getting closer and closer. After not understanding the situation, he pushed his demon eyes to the limit. Time slowed down. The world around him became sharp. Every detail, every speck of dust in the air, every slight muscle contraction on his allies' faces was visible to him. Then he observed them. The first was a tall man with silver hair and golden eyes. He wore only a white coat made of some kind of leather, but Rigger immediately saw that it had magical properties. The man's gaze was penetrating and intimidating. His irises were so small that one could see all the white around them. When he looked at him, when he saw that silver hair and those golden eyes, he felt a thirst for blood. A part of him wanted to tear him in two right there. But he was now in control of himself, and he wouldn't start growling like a beast. So, despite an unsettling feeling, it was just that, an annoyance. After all, looking closely, he was certain he couldn't win. It wasn't just his mana capacity. It was everything. He felt that he was facing a superior being, in strength, in status, an absolute predator at the top of the food chain. That was the feeling. Then, he looked at the girl, and his mind short-circuited. What is this? One of them had more mana than any other being he had ever encountered, and the other had nothing, absolutely nothing. She was a girl with long black hair, something very rare in this world, and, for some reason, he felt that she was slightly familiar. She wore various magical items all over her body and a white mask, which was also a magical item. These two were anomalies. But again, even though both were clearly coming toward his group, he felt no hostility whatsoever. Aren't they the source of this? His pupils darted quickly, scanning everything around. No magic circle, no hidden monster. Then why did everyone suddenly freeze like that? He noticed all of this in milliseconds using his eyes. He even noticed that Lilia had peed, but he couldn't find the focus. He wouldn't be able to carry everyone and flee from there, so the only option was to talk. At that moment, his magical eyes reached their limit. The world returned to normal. He placed his hand on the sword hilt and said, in a firm voice, "Stop right there." Rigger stepped in front of Ghislaine, positioning himself at the forefront of the group. His body was tense, and his mind teemed with questions. The man with silver hair and golden eyes stopped along with the girl by his side. His cold gaze swept over Rigger's group before he spoke, his deep voice. "HM, an ebony wolf." Rigger maintained his firm posture, holding Tsukikage tightly, but without unsheathing the blade. "Who are you? What have you done with my companions?" he asked, his voice laden with caution. The man, without changing his expression, observed the group. All the warriors in the group were ready to attack, weapons in hand, eyes fixed on him, as if facing their worst enemy and greatest nightmare. What an unusual group to encounter. He murmured, "Ghislaine Dedoldia, Aerys Boris Greyrat, Lilia Greyrat." His gaze narrowed slightly. "And is that Aisha Greyrat?" Ghislaine growled aggressively. "How do you know our names?" Rigger was confused. Ghislaine's reaction was extreme. What was happening? He looked at his group. "Do you know him?" he asked, his voice calm, yet full of inquiry. "No," answered Aerys, Ghislaine, and Idar simultaneously, their voices trembling, their faces pale. The man turned his attention to Idar and Skull, his eyebrow furrowing. Rigger sensed the hostility. "Rida, what are you doing here? You should be dead." Idar clenched his fists, gritting his teeth. "I don't know you, and my name is Idar." Rigger felt his confusion and tension increase. Why was everyone reacting with such fear and hostility? If they didn't know this man, why did they treat him as a mortal enemy? Why did the man become hostile as soon as he saw Idar if they didn't know each other? Finally, the man looked directly at Rigger. His gaze seemed to pierce his soul. "And you, who are you?" Rigger remained cautious. Without turning around, he ordered the group, "Don't attack him. Under no circumstances." He knew that a battle there would be suicidal. To prevent the conflict from escalating, he lowered his sword. Idar did not like that. "Rigger." The look Rigger gave him made him stop. Then, Rigger turned his attention back to the stranger. "Answer first. Who are you, and what ability did you use on my group?" The man raised an eyebrow, looking slightly curious. "Don't you avert your gaze? Aren't you afraid?" A brief silence ensued before he answered. "I am Orsted. Now who are you?" Rigger narrowed his eyes. "I am Rigger Dedoldia." Orsted seemed bothered by that answer. "That's impossible. Who are your parents?" Rigger did not avert his gaze. "Who are yours?" Orsted maintained his impenetrable expression. "I did nothing to your companions. They are just afraid." I am a dragon god, Orsted. Now, it must have been you who used the earthquake spell. Who taught you that magic? Rigger paused for a second and thought. Perhaps he is a friend of the master? He replied, My master is Verdia Solarion. Orsted furrowed his brows again, appearing ill-humored. Verdia Solarion is dead. An intense anger grew within Rigger. His body tensed, and an almost palpable pressure emanated from him. She seemed very much alive while teaching me magic. His voice was low and sharp as a blade. Orsted appeared to ponder something for a moment. The tension in the air was suffocating. Then he spoke. Have you ever heard the name Haidagami? Rigger reacted before he could restrain himself. Even though he quickly hid his expression, it was enough. Orsted saw it. In the next moment, Rigger saw death. His instinct made him activate his demon eyes. Everything around him slowed down, but Orsted was still fast, impossible to dodge. His hand was aimed at his heart. Rigger raised Tsukikage and engulfed the blade in faint flames. Orsted's strike collided with his sword. The impact made him tremble from head to toe. He immediately began conjuring a physical barrier magic on his chest. Orsted said, I see 2 apostles then. Then die. Idar, grab Aisha and fall back, shouted Ghislaine, advancing at full speed, wielding the long sword of light. Rigger tried to attack as well. As soon as he slashed with Tsukikage, the blue blade was stopped by the dragon god's arm, creating only a small cut, all happening in milliseconds, and the flames had not yet accumulated. What happened next was confusing. Rigger unsheathed Night Hunter and struck the enemy's abdomen at lightning speed, but a blow he didn't even see broke his wrist, forcing him to let go of the blade. The man instantly noticed the barrier on his chest. The next thing he saw was an elbow to his jaw, and shortly after, felt a punch hit his temple. Rigger felt his brain shaking inside his skull as a crack formed, and he spun in the air. It almost killed him. If he were an ordinary warrior, his brain would now be just a messy, gloppy mass. In fact, Rigger felt the intent to kill. The man wanted to kill him with that blow, but underestimated Rigger's physical and bone resistance. His vision swirled. His perception became a jumble. Orsted even noticed that he was still alive and was about to finish him off, but Ghislaine was already on top using the long sword of light. Before he could recover, a brutal kick struck him in the stomach. He felt his ribs break and was launched like a projectile, flying violently. Idar didn't hesitate for a second. Everything happened in an instant, and he grabbed Aisha and ran in the opposite direction. Aerys, however, advanced to fight alongside Ghislaine. Ghislaine reached Orsted with a perfect long sword of light. But even the stance he took after the kick he gave to Rigger was a way to lure Ghislaine into a trap. It was as if, from the beginning, he was in control, every step, every action, and every movement calculated to bring him closer to victory. You're faster than usual, Ghislaine Dedoldia. Hiramian slid along Orsted's hand without injuring him. He manipulated the blade, as if the warrior were willingly handing it over. And Ghislaine, whose grip on the blade was strong, was guided along with the blade by an irresistible force. Before Ghislaine realized it, one of his hands naturally flowed along the surface of the blade and struck her neck, rendering her unconscious instantly. All the speed and strength that Ghislaine had used against him only aided him. Orsted redirected the power, spun her body, and hurled her off the cliff. Ghislaine vanished in the fall. Orsted remained impassive, his golden eyes analyzing each enemy before him with cold precision. Hiya! Without even a second's pause, Aerys emerged from his blind spot, his sword whistling through the air in a fierce cut aimed at the dragon god's neck. At the same time, Skull charged with his exposed fangs, attacking from another angle. But Orsted neutralized them with ease. All he did was gently stop her sword with the palm of his hand. Or at least, that's what it seemed. And yet, that was enough to send her spinning through the air. She flew toward the mountain wall, as if struck by a direct blow. The stones disintegrated upon impact, and she fell with a dull thud. Skull met a similar fate to Ghislaine. Orsted dodged his fangs by mere millimeters and only slightly pushed Skull, accelerating his charge as he hurled him off the cliff. You have potential, but you still need time to grow. Aerys Boreas Greyrat. He turned to the stones and said thoughtfully, magic without enchantment. You are certainly very resilient. At that moment, from the rubble, a roar echoed. Rigor emerged, his body covered in dust, eyes burning with contained rage. His healing magic quickly repaired the superficial damage to his brain tissue. But even that quickly was enough for half of his group to be neutralized. This was dangerous. If the damage were just a little greater, he wouldn't be able to heal with his current level of healing magic. His senses were still a bit dulled. He quickly activated his eyes and processed everything with his senses. Ghislaine, having just awakened mid-freefall, used Hiramian as support to cling to the cliff. Aerys, with several broken bones, but not life-threatening. Skull, falling freely toward the bottom of the cliff, but conscious will survive. I need to hold him until everyone can escape. This guy cannot be defeated. Orsted spared not a second's glance at him. Instead, he turned his head toward Idar and Aisha, who were closer. Lilia was in front of him, sword in hand, but her hands trembled uncontrollably. Her face was pale with absolute terror. Orsted paid no attention to her. He simply moved with superhuman speed toward the fleeing ones. No! Rigor roared, activating his howling magic and beginning to run at full speed to catch him. His voice reverberated with power, but Orsted was far ahead. At the same time, he prepared a lightning spell to launch directly at the dragon god. But Orsted merely casually raised a hand. Ranma! The magic was instantly undone in the air, dispersing like smoke in the wind. Rigor's eyes widened. Wah! He accelerated his run even more while wrapping Tsukikage in furious lightning. But Orsted was already in front of Idar. The water saint, realizing there was no escape, turned at the last moment. With his sword in one hand and Aisha in the other, he struck with the flow, reaching a level he had never before attained. But against this opponent that wouldn't help him, one hand deflected the sword naturally. Idar turned his back and pressed Aisha against his chest, instinctively protecting her. Orsted's hand pierced through Idar's back like a spear, destroying his heart. The world seemed to stop for a moment. Blood streamed down Orsted's arm, and Idar's body trembled, his eyes wide with surprise and pain. Aisha, clinging to him, looked at the bloody hole with tear-filled eyes. Idar's warm blood began to soak her clothes. She opened her mouth to scream, but the sound that emerged was a strangled sob. The dragon god said, "Sorry for the rudeness, Aisha Greyrat." He turned to Idar, who was bleeding, and said, "Rida, tell the man god that the one who will kill him is the dragon god, Orsted." Orsted's voice was cold, definitive. He slowly withdrew his hand, letting Idar fall to his knees. The warrior smiled faintly, even with blood dripping from his mouth. He looked at Aisha, his expression softening. "It will be all right, little one." Aisha sobbed, clinging to him, refusing to let him go. Her small fingers tried to close the wound, but the blood continued to gush. Rigor felt a part of him shatter. A growl of pure rage and despair echoed through the mountains. Orsted turned his gaze to Rigor, assessing him. "Was he your close friend? I can see why Hitagami would bind you two together." But Rigor couldn't hear anything. His mind was blank. Hatred consumed every coherent thought. Escape? Even if he wanted to, he couldn't. Idar is dead. Dead. I can't heal him from this. He couldn't leave Aisha and the others behind. He couldn't let his companions die. He couldn't let this man get away. I need to fight. I can only fight. Tsukikage burned with furious lightning. Rigor launched himself at Orsted with everything he had. The dragon god blocked his charge with his arm, as before, but was slightly surprised when he felt a deep cut on his arm. "You use magic in an interesting way, or is it that sword?" But Rigor did not answer. He attacked again. Blow after blow. His fury was channeled in every movement, but Orsted was faster, stronger. His technique was unmatched. He began evading the sword, learning Rigor's patterns with terrifying speed. The fight lasted shortly. Rigor barely noticed when his hand was crushed and Tsukikage was wrenched from him. The pain came next, A punch to the chin made him stagger, dazed. In the next moment, 3 brutal strikes pierced his torso, easily penetrating his barrier. Lung, kidney, heart. He staggered. What? His body was failing. Blood flowed freely from his wounds. His knees buckled. His vision blurred. He collapsed against a wall, leaving a trail of blood on the floor. He tried to get up, but his body wouldn't obey. He looked around and saw the girl. Aerys, who had been trying to drag herself into the fight to help, looked at him with an incredulous stare. Yeah, our rigger. Rigger! Aerys screamed, her voice full of horror and despair. She crawled toward him, trying to reach him. Rigger thought, damn, is this how I'm going to die? Wah, 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 she screamed. Rigger, get up. Someone save him. Rigger's going to die. He's bleeding so much. Anyone. Rigger, feeling his consciousness gradually fading, thought, really a world full of superhumans who can kill you without any consequences. He had trained. Not like he had dedicated his life to training, but he never relaxed. He had talent, but even that couldn't save him in the end. I didn't even leave any descendants. Perhaps it's just fate. Orsted looked at Aerys with a neutral expression. Was he important to you? I'm sorry, Aerys Boreas Greyrat, but eventually you will understand. Come, Nanahoshi. But the masked girl hesitated. She looked at Rigger, bleeding and struggling to breathe, and then at Orsted. About that, don't you think it would be better to let him live? That was the last thing Rigger heard before his consciousness finally faded away. I woke up in a place that was already familiar to me. It was a blank space of infinite emptiness. In front of me was the familiar and loathsome white figure with its face covered by a strange mosaic. Hitagami. At first, I said nothing. Idar had died. Skull had fallen off the cliff, and his fate was unknown. The dragon god seemed to intend to spare some of us for some reason. But I would never be sure. After all, now I was dead too. I began to replay the entire scene of the battle in my mind. It all happened in a matter of seconds. The dragon god was very strong, very, very strong. He was holding back the whole time. It was clear that he was using strictly only the force necessary to defeat us. Before this battle, I believed that with our group, few things could threaten us in the entire world. But in a matter of seconds, we were massacred by the dragon god, Orsted. Before that, I believed that I was approaching the top, coming close to at least being considered one of the strongest in the world. But in my last battle, I clearly saw what I considered strength being crushed before my eyes. No one could resist. Besides that guy, the strongest people he had ever seen and fought were probably Galgard, Larix, or Ornthorn. He was sure that any one of them would be defeated by the dragon god in a matter of seconds. Hitagami finally spoke, sounding worried. You seem shaken. Anger began to rise. I replied, repressing my fury. That was your plan? You guided me to the dragon god, who would kill me just for knowing you. Hitagami raised his arms defensively. Hey, I'm not to blame for that. He's the bad guy in the story. He was the one who attacked you all. Rigger roared. After finding out that I knew you, I began to think about everything that happened in the fight, everything that Orsted told me. And I remembered, and what about Idar? Why did Orsted think he knew you and killed him because of that? Hitagami answered by making a gesture for me to calm down. Hey, getting furious isn't going to solve your problems here. I never spoke with Idar, and I don't know why he killed you. But he's the evil dragon god who wants to destroy the world. Any stupid reason would be good enough for him, right? Cut that out. You must have done something stupid for him to hate you so much. You damn god, I shouted. That doesn't matter now. After all, I'm already dead. You've achieved your goal. Are you happy? Hitagami fell silent. I too said nothing more. A silence remained for a while in the absolute void. After it seemed that I had calmed down, he said, Is it over? I did not answer. Then he continued, You're not dead yet. I was surprised, what? Then, Idar too. But he interrupted me before I finished the question. No, Idar is really dead. That gave me another shock. That's right. And I already said that Orsted is my enemy. You're blaming the messenger here. How was I supposed to know that he would attack you out of nowhere? I was struggling not to start cursing that damn god again. The fury was consuming me. But as he said, it wouldn't help me now. Normally, I wouldn't give Hitagami the time of day, but now he might be my only source of information about my current situation. You can see this kind of thing, can't you? If he's such your enemy, and you claim to help me, why didn't you warn me about him? We would have waited a day or two and then followed the same route, I said, holding myself back to remain rational. Hitagami sighed. I can't see anything related to the dragon god. It's one of his curses. I smiled sinisterly, beginning to think that this guy was just messing with me. How could his powers be so convenient? Even so, I forced myself to calm down. Are you sure that not being seen by you isn't a blessing? And what do you mean by one of his curses? What are the others? Hitagami promptly raised 3 fingers. He has 3 curses. The first is the one that makes him hated or feared by all the beings in the world, without exception. I thought about the reactions of all the members of my group when they saw Orsted. I had never seen Ghislaine with as much fear or hatred as at that moment, not even when she was surrounded by blue dragons in the Blue Dragon range. The same goes for the other members. No one seemed to know him, but everyone seemed frightened, as if they were facing their worst enemy, yet there was still a flaw. And me? I asked. That must be because you are technically from another world. Thinking that it made sense, I continued. And the other curses? Another one is the one that prevents me from seeing anything about where he goes, what he does, and with whom he interacts. Everything about him is blurred to me, which prevented me from warning you that you would encounter him. I fell silent, signaling for him to continue. The third is a curse that prevents him from using his full strength. He can never go all out. I paused for a moment. How strong is he? He is the strongest in the world. Again, the anger began to return. Honestly, I was already stressed, hurt, and furious over Idar's death, but interacting with Hitagami amplified that 100 times. I said, that doesn't tell me anything. Hitagami shrank with feigned fear. Of course it does. But if you want a proper measure, he is at least many times stronger than the god of the sword. I reflected for a moment. I was going to meet the god of the sword in a few months. If that were true, I could really have an approximate measure. Of course, that considering that Hitagami wasn't just randomly lying. I asked again, isn't the god of technique the strongest in the world? Hitagami answered, he is strong, but if they really fought and the dragon god went all out, he would win. In fact, going all out, he could even destroy the world. But he can't due to the supposed curse. Exactly. Hitagami responded promptly. At this point, I was already suspicious. This treacherous god was being especially helpful this time, not dodging my questions as usual. Of course, I hadn't abandoned the hypothesis that everything he was saying was just a bunch of crap. But some things made sense, mainly the curse of fear he described, and although he could be mixing truths and lies to deceive me, I didn't get that impression. And why are you being so helpful this time? You usually ignore all my questions. Rigor asked suspiciously, staring at Hitagami, who smiled maliciously. Hitagami tilted his head to the side, that twisted smile never leaving his face as he said, I was already helping you up until now. Now I have even more reasons, right? Isn't it like they say in your previous world? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. He looks directly at me, although I couldn't tell. I had the feeling he was looking into my eyes. I can see it in your eyes. I can feel your fury. And I can also see that this fury isn't directed 100% at me. I just stare at that malicious smile. He knew exactly what I was thinking. He knew of my anger and my fury. Hitagami was right about one thing. The target of his anger wasn't just him. No matter the cause, no matter the reason. It wouldn't even matter if Idar really knew Hitagami. It was Orsted who killed him. He killed my best friend without giving us the chance to talk, without reason, on a whim. One of the people closest to Rigor in his new life, someone with whom he fought countless battles, celebrated victories, he was also there in defeats. I could feel my anger burning stronger. I still didn't know why the rest of the group had been spared, and even me according to Hitagami, but that didn't change the fact that Orsted tried to kill me. And he killed Idar. There was no more reason to hesitate. If Hitagami wasn't lying, and I was indeed alive, I would make the dragon god regret not having killed me today. I would make him feel the same pain that I felt, the same pain that he caused. I would destroy the dragon god, no matter the level of strength I had to reach. He would regret it. I looked at Hitagami, feeling the weight of my anger, of the accumulated hatred. "This doesn't mean I'm going to trust you, God-man," I said, my voice cold but full of disdain. "Since you can see what I'm thinking, you must know I don't trust you, I never trusted you, and I never will." Hitagami smiled again, twistedly, as if he already knew and that this was exactly the reaction he wanted. Of course," he replied, as if he were having fun. "Hope you have good luck in your endeavors, Rigger." And, with his triggered words, the white void around us began to slowly and gradually disappear. I opened my eyes slowly, the blurry vision gradually giving way to a painful clarity. The first thing I saw were the faces of Ghislaine, Aisha, and Aerys. I was lying down, and it seemed in Ghislaine's lap. My body was still sore, muscles and bones complaining of the pain. When I woke up, instinctively, I activated my regeneration magic. The feeling of healing was almost immediate, as if a wave of energy coursing through my body was cleaning all the wounds and repairing the damage my body had suffered. I could feel that the mortal wounds had somehow been closed. There were 3 huge scars on my chest. But that healing was not enough to fully restore me. It was made to be just enough so that I wouldn't die. Aerys' words echoed in my ear, filled with concern. "Rigger," she exclaimed, her voice trembling. Soon, Aisha spoke as well. "Master," the little one, with teary eyes, as if she had been crying for a long time. I looked at them, both looking at me with a mix of relief and sadness. However, it was Ghislaine who caught my attention the most. She was looking directly at my face. Her expression was impassive, but in her eyes I could see something hard to explain. A feeling of helplessness, a deep loneliness, something she rarely showed. She seemed to carry a silent burden, a fear that I did not completely understand. As soon as my eyes fully opened, she looked deep into them as if trying to seek some confirmation, some sign that I was really there. Before I could say anything, she pulled me into a hug. A tight hug, almost desperate, as if she were afraid that if she let me go, I would disappear. Aerys and little Aisha joined the hug, the 3 of them enveloping me in a kind of mantle of comfort. I could feel the silent tears of Aerys and Aisha mingling, feeling the moisture of their faces against mine. But Ghislaine was not crying. I saw no tear in her eyes, only the strength of her embrace. The way she held me, as if she did not want me to leave, as if she did not have the strength to let me go again. I closed my eyes for a moment, absorbing their warmth, the warmth of those 3 who in some way brought me a bit of peace. But as my regeneration took effect, the discomfort in my chest grew. The smell of the snow, the icy touch of the air, and then the sight of Lilia next to the carriage made me realize something nearby. She was looking at the snow with an empty expression. Near her, there was a cloth spread over something. A bad feeling hit my stomach, a deep and heavy tightness, as if reality was finally imposing itself. I knew what it was. It was Idar. He was dead. I was spared, but Idar was still dead, just as the God-man had said. The weight of this truth hit me hard, a silent pain that seemed to infiltrate every fiber of my being. The feeling of loss, that something had been torn from me, was overwhelming. I looked around, searching for any sign of Skoll, but I did not find him. My heart raced as I remembered him falling off the cliff. With an anxious voice, I asked hastily, "Where is Skoll?" Ghislaine replied calmly, "He's fine, he went out to hunt." I relaxed a little, but the feeling of unease did not dissipate. I looked again at Idar's covered corpse, the snow falling over the cloth, as if it were paying a silent farewell. My chest tightened, but the closeness and warmth of my wife and my 2 apprentices helped to ease the emptiness I felt inside. I buried my face in Ghislaine's neck, feeling the softness of her skin against my face, the familiar aroma she carried. And there we stayed, in silence, with the snow falling around us. The snow seemed darker. Lilia, then, came to us and joined the embrace without saying a word. And together we stayed there. I didn't know for how long. And the snow kept falling slowly and softly. The sky was cloudy, and the snow kept falling. The air was dry, cold, and the smell of rock hung heavily in the atmosphere. Rigger had his hand on the ground, kneeling on one leg on the rocky terrain. Magic flowed from his fingers with precision and control, calmly shaping the land before him. Small stones moved, the soil rose gently, and, slowly, a tombstone took shape, simple, yet firm, strong like the man it honored. His name, Idar, was engraved on the tombstone. His body had not been buried. In this world, the risk of the dead becoming undead was real, so Idar's body was cremated and the ashes were spread over the mountain range. All around, the silence was absolute. Aerys, fists clenched, stared fixedly at the tombstone, biting her lower lip, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to well up. Ghislaine remained serious, motionless, arms crossed, a penetrating gaze fixed on the tombstone. Lilia held Aisha in her arms, who trembled slightly, sobbing quietly with her face buried in her mother's neck. The sound of approaching footsteps slowly echoed. Skoll appeared among the mountains, his body covered in dust and scratches. He carried in his mouth the corpse of a large monster with twisted horns, something resembling a goat, a native creature of the region, typical prey of the red dragons. His eyes, normally alert, were somewhat empty. Skoll walked to the tombstone and dropped the creature beside the grave. After that, he only moved a few steps away, stopping beside Ghislaine. The group remained there, motionless for long seconds. Then Rigger, still on his knees before the tombstone, lowered his head, closed his eyes, and whispered, "I will not forget. Idar, do not worry. I will avenge you." The impact of those words was immediate. Aerys widened her eyes and turned to him, shocked. Lilia remained still, her lips parted, as if she had heard something impossible. Ghislaine, on the other hand, remained impassive. Her eyes did not change. To her, it was obvious. The group resumed their journey shortly after. The carriage moved slowly along the uneven paths of the mountainous region. The sound of creaking wheels was the only noise. No one spoke. The silence was cutting. Inside, Rigger sat with his legs crossed, focused on his own flow of mana. He was trying to replicate the magic nullification that Orsted had used. In battle, when he was about to cast a lightning bolt, Orsted nullified it with ease. This would be a very useful ability if mastered, essentially negating any long-range magic from the opponent. But he was having a lot of difficulties with it. It required him to practice a completely new path of magic, and his already excellent control, while manipulating magic in one way, hindered his progress. It was like learning to walk again, but with his feet tied. Ghislaine, sitting in front of him, watched the sky outside the carriage with a penetrating gaze. A determined look. Predatory. There was no doubt in her eyes. Aerys was next to Aisha, knees together, fingers intertwined. She couldn't take her eyes off Rigger. Her face was tense, covered by an anguish she tried, in vain, to hide. After a while, her voice finally broke the silence. "Rigger, did you say you were going to avenge Idar?" Rigger did not take his eyes off his mana flow. He simply replied, "Yes." Aerys swallowed hard. She hesitated, then whispered, "You almost died this time. Aren't you afraid?" Rigger finally stopped his training and looked at her. At that moment, Aerys' face, even as she tried to appear firm, trembled. He observed her, and also looked at Aisha, who was staring at him. Both so young. Aerys was barely almost 12 years old, and Aisha, only 4, but with a mind as sharp as few. Both had faced something that would leave adults collapsing. He approached, picked up Aisha in his arms, and carefully placed her in Aerys' lap. The two looked at him in surprise. Then, he spoke with a firm yet gentle voice. "Aerys, are you worried about being defeated easily?" "Yes," she whispered. "He is not an opponent you should compare yourself to right now." Aerys said, "But I trained so much." Rigger interrupted. "Listen, you two are still very young. You still have plenty of time to get stronger." He paused. "Even I and Ghislaine were defeated easily. But that's only a problem if you aren't planning to improve even more." He looked at the two intently. "Everyone is afraid. There's no problem with that. If you're afraid, it means you're alive. You two were incredibly brave today." And then he continued, "Aerys, Aisha. That man was the dragon god. Orsted, the second among the world's powers. Even Ghislaine, normally stoic, gripped the handle of the Hieromion so tightly that the leather creaked. Lilia, who was driving the carriage outside, tensed upon hearing this, but said nothing. Rigor continued, looking at the girls. Even if I have extreme confidence in my talent, I don't know if I can match his strength. Even if it were me, there's no guarantee. Aerys opened her eyes, surprised. Aisha murmured, incredulous. Even the master can't? But then Rigor smiled. He turned his face toward Ghislaine, who was looking at him. Since Rigor had awakened, he had seen. Her look had changed. It was the look of a huntress. It was evident to him that she also wanted to kill the dragon god. Of course, perhaps not for the same reasons as him. And then Rigor said, looking again at Aisha and Aerys, "But I won't be fighting alone." Ghislaine was briefly surprised, but soon smiled, satisfied. Rigor then continued, "You have already met an unbeatable opponent. Nothing that appears in your path can surpass this threat." The two girls listened to him in silence. Aisha, with her large attentive eyes, was processing every word. Aerys, after a moment, took a deep breath, her eyes beginning to shine, and exclaimed forcefully, "I too, I will help kill the dragon god. I will also avenge Idar." Aisha looked at her, and then turned her eyes to Rigor, hesitantly, and then, "Master, may I?" Rigor extended his hand and patted both of their heads. With a smile, he replied, "Little Aisha, you're probably still too young for that." He paused and said, "But even so, I will give you both a test." The two sat up straight, eyes alert. He crossed his arms and calculated something mentally. Finally, he spoke clearly. "If you want to help with this, you must at the very least be able to defeat me, without me using Tuki or magic." A silence followed those words. Aerys stared at him intently. She had never defeated him in combat, even without him using Tuki. His natural strength was simply too great. She hadn't even come close. But now, more than ever, she wanted to. "Yes," she shouted, determined. Aisha, on the other hand, remained silent. But her eyes narrowed, and soon she began to calculate, processing mentally what would be necessary to surpass her master under these conditions. A 4-year-old child, with the gaze of a strategist. Ghislaine simply watched it all with a slight smile on her lips. Lilia, outside, listened silently. The journey continued. The tension that had previously existed in the carriage dissipated a little after that. After the conversation with Rigor, Aerys had fallen asleep, leaning against the side of the carriage, her face still a little furrowed. Aisha, nestled in her lap, slept with her forehead gently pressed against the older one's chest, her features serene. Rigor was silent, as always when he trained, but there was a certain softness in his expression. His left hand sculpted the air slowly, manipulating the earth to create a statue of a red dragon. His right hand, however, rested on Ghislaine's neck, tenderly caressing her long silver hair. The warrior remained there, with half-closed eyes, leaning against him, relaxed, but with the same wild and determined presence that seemed to have dominated her since the confrontation with Orsted had awakened. From the front seat, driving the carriage's reins, Lilia watched the girls sleeping. Her eyes were teary, but her expression was firm, like someone about to make a difficult decision. After a few seconds of hesitation, she spoke. "Rigor, you can take Aisha to the sword's sanctuary." Rigor turned slightly surprised. That wasn't the answer he expected. In fact, after everything that had happened, he was sure Lilia would flat out refuse to let Aisha go with him. But she allowed it? "Why?" he asked, looking at her. Lilia was silent for a few seconds. Ghislaine also turned her eyes to her, alert. And then, Lilia took a deep breath and answered, in a low voice, "I don't want Aisha to feel what I felt at that moment." Lilia lowered her eyes, looking at the trembling hands on the reins. Her voice trembled. "That man, Orsted, he went toward my daughter. And I couldn't do anything. I was paralyzed. Even if I wanted to, my body wouldn't move. I didn't have the strength to fight. I didn't have the strength to protect her." She clenched her fists, as if trying to push the memory away. "I don't want Aisha to be like me. I don't want to trap her in a life of helplessness. She is very talented. If she can choose, I don't want to be the person who held her back. Rigger fell silent. There was understanding in his gaze. Ghislaine remained quiet, but her gaze was fixed on Lilia. Then let her choose, Rigger replied. When the time comes, Aisha will decide if she wants to go or stay. Silence returned for a moment, heavy yet serene. It was Ghislaine who spoke next, her voice low but direct. Rigger? Who is the god man? She did not look at him this time. Her head was still resting against him. You once asked us about him, and Lilia said that when the dragon god killed Idar, he asked to send a message to this so-called god man. Moreover, Orsted only attacked us after you reacted to the name, and also called you both apostles. Rigger thought for a moment, and concluded that he had no reason to hide it. And then he told. He spoke about the strange white world where he first encountered Hitagami. He recounted his appearance, a smiling white figure, but with a face hard to remember. He explained his enigmatic words, his attempts to gain Rigger's trust. Lilia and Ghislaine listened in silence. Rigger spoke about the dwarves' territory, about the instructions he received in dreams, about subtle and treacherous manipulation, and finally about the last time he saw him, after being killed by Orsted. If this man appears in your dreams, do not trust him, Rigger said, his voice laden with seriousness. I consider him as dangerous as Orsted, but he is a different kind of threat, cunning, invisible, a manipulator. Ghislaine became pensive and then asked in a low voice, All right, Rigger, do you really not know if you can reach the strength of the dragon god? Rigger fell silent again. Hitagami's words were still in his mind. If he takes a fight seriously, the entire world could be destroyed. He wasn't sure how much of that was true, but since there were legends of continents being split in half and such, it would be plausible to some extent. He answered, I don't know. There are still many things I don't know about magic and about Tuki. Perhaps someday I will reach that level. But he is on a different level. It's hard to say. Then he turned his gaze back to Ghislaine. I think I will be able to say when I discover the strength of the sword god. After all, before I consider defeating Orsted, I need to defeat your master first. She fell silent. Her gaze lost itself on the horizon, but there was a glimmer of anticipation in her eyes. And then the conversation diverted. The three exchanged words about the path, about training, about the little things. The tension dissipated like dust in the wind. But even now, everything was different. The group seemed incomplete. They had traveled together for the last 2.5 years, and Idar's death left a crack that would never truly be filled. When they finally emerged from the lower jaw of the red dragon, the vastness of the Azura kingdom plains greeted them. The carriage stopped, and Rigger jumped out with a fluid movement. He carried the sealing chains of the Mad Dragon King tied to his belt. His eyes turned to Tsukikage, his blue sword, which had been disarmed before he lost consciousness, and his swords could have been taken without resistance. But he left them there for some reason. At least he didn't take Tsukikage, he murmured, relieved. After all, he had already lost all the memories he carried with him when he was ambushed. That sword was his memento of his mentor, Vertius Solarion. By the way, Orsted said should be dead. He would send a letter to her warning her to leave the great forest just for safety. Further ahead, the rest of the group had already set up a small camp. A tent, an improvised campfire. There was no threat, at least not immediate. Rigger turned to the group, his expression resolute. I will be back in the blink of an eye. And then, in an explosive impulse, Rigger dashed back towards the mountain range. His silhouette disappeared among the stones and the icy winds. His goal now was only one, to capture a red dragon. And with that, his oath of vengeance would begin to take shape. Until just a few days ago, I was excited about the idea of capturing a red dragon. After all, who had never dreamed of riding a dragon? Even when I found out I was in a fantasy world, that was one of my first thoughts. It would be a symbolic step toward absolute power. A bestial warrior, flying on a creature that the inhabitants of this world consider walking calamities. But that excitement disappeared after the incident with the red dragon's lower jaw. At several moments, I considered simply giving up, forgetting that idea, following the course of the journey with the rest of the group, and focusing on anything else, for I was disheartened. But in the end, I decided to continue. There were obvious benefits in taming a dragon: flight, reputation, dominion, and perhaps subconsciously a part of me wanted something to fill the void that had recently opened. But the truth is that I wasn't patient enough to tame a dragon. Not even close. Jumping between the rocky and snowy cliffs, running along the rough ridges of the mountains, my eyes gazed at the horizon, but my mind returned. It returned to the moment when the dragon god pierced Idar's chest with his hand. And every time that scene replayed in my head, a new wave of anger flooded over me. A dry, cold, constant fury. And I knew that it wasn't my body out of control as before. It was just hatred. Anger for not being able to do anything. What would I do, after all? Go to the dragon god and kill him? Just imagining it, my blood burned. But that burn didn't push me forward. It corroded me from within. It was impotence. A cursed feeling I hadn't felt in years. The memory of being weak, of being beneath, of not being able to protect someone. I continued climbing. One step after another, the mountains became my hunting ground. It was then that I detected my first target. A wandering red dragon. He was young, lost from the group. Red dragons weren't good at aerial maneuvers. They could glide for days, fly in a straight line as far as the eye could see. They were very resilient. But thanks to their inability in complex maneuvers, they often glided out of their territory. Sometimes they ended up in nearby villages or towns. Sometimes they just ended up at the base of the mountain range, which is where I was now. Thanks to that, I didn't need to delve deep into their territory. It was enough to wait for the wanderers. But I wasn't in the mood for a long game. I just wanted a dragon that obeyed, one that submitted, and if they didn't adapt quickly enough, I would kill them. And that's exactly what I did. When I found the first one, I didn't give it time for anything. No words, no elegant movements. I leaped upon him like a predator and beat him with my bare fists. No Tuki. That was important. I had challenged Aerys and Aisha to defeat me without me using Tuki. So I was restraining myself, testing myself, pushing myself to the physical limit. I was 12 years old, almost 13. I was entering a new phase of growth, and the pure effort, the raw pain beyond Tuki, were important stimuli. So I smashed him, fist after fist, tooth after tooth. Every time he fell, I healed him with magic. And he got up again, and attacked me again, and I knocked him down again. This cycle repeated until my patience ran out. And when that happened, I killed him. I took the magical core, the fangs. The dried blood on my hands didn't bother me. Some of the wandering dragons were stronger. Most of them were young, rank of threats, but sometimes there were a few stronger ones. For those, I couldn't win with my physical strength alone, so I used Tuki. They were alone, disoriented. They were simple targets. I repeated this process countless times, always the same way, without hesitation. Honestly, if someone said I was just taking out my anger on these dragons, I wouldn't have been able to deny it. I was angry. I was furious. Hatred consumed me from within. I buried Idar with my own hands. I made a silent vow of revenge. But everything seemed so empty. The journey continued. The steps moved forward. But Idar was no longer there. I tried to convince myself that it was just another casualty, just another loss among the countless warriors who fought under my command. But it wasn't. Idar was my brother in arms. He had no qualms about laughing at me, about provoking me. He was one of the few who didn't bow to my strength. He was a true friend, and now he was dead. Vertia once told me that there was no resurrection magic. A scene replayed in my mind. Orsted, with his golden eyes, his hand piercing through Idar's chest, throwing him aside like a bag of meat, as if he were nothing. And I couldn't do anything. And every time I remembered, I punched the dragons even harder. Even when dead, I struck. My claws opened cuts, my fists cracked scales, my fangs tore flesh. My hands had no scales to protect them. My fingers became raw flesh, blood trickled from my nails, skin tore. And when a dragon resisted my fists and claws, when it was stronger than the others and I couldn't beat it without Tuki, I became irritated. I used Tsukikage and sliced it into dozens of pieces. Then I healed my hands and moved on to the next. And again, and again, my roars echoed through the mountains, trying to hide the pain, the loss, the emptiness. It was then that I found him, a young red dragon, like all the others, about 5 or 6 times the size of Skull. If I had to point out something different about him, it would be the condition of his body. It was covered in scars. One of his 2 horns was broken in half, and on the same side, there was a severe scar where his right eye should have been. Furthermore, one of his wings was clearly broken, fallen, and useless. I maintained the same procedure I had adopted with the others. I appeared before him and challenged him with my presence. But, unlike the others, this dragon didn't even look at me. He just continued watching the distant mountains, lying down, waiting for his death by blood loss. He didn't seem in the least interested in tearing me apart, which I found strange. I leaped upon him without hesitation and healed all his wounds. The dragon remained still for a moment. His broken horn and the destroyed eye were not restored, but all the other wounds, internal and external, disappeared before my magic. For a moment, he didn't understand. But when he realized that his strength had returned, he finally turned to me, who was sitting calmly on a rock, waiting for him to attack. I was impatient. I really didn't care about any sad story the dragon might have had. I was just waiting for him to attack me soon. As predicted, he attacked me. He roared fiercely as he advanced toward me with bites and claws. I fought him with my own claws, punches, and kicks. It was an intense battle. He was strong, I could feel it. He still wasn't an adult dragon, probably, but his strength surpassed that of the other young dragons I had encountered. Strong enough that I couldn't defeat him without using Tuki. Usually that was enough to irritate me, and, consequently, for me to cut them into several pieces. But I thought it would be a waste. I had spent mana to heal that enormous body of all its wounds. Subconsciously, I wanted that to have some value. I defeated him with the sword, but I didn't kill him like the others. And I healed him right after. I waited expectantly, but, to my disappointment, he blew a burst of fire at me in response. I was disappointed. So he would continue fighting too? That was a waste. But when I cut the flaming breath using the flow, what I saw shocked me. He was running, and he was already far away. I was in shock for a moment, and then I launched into pursuit. He was almost taking flight when I leaped and grabbed him by the tail, pulling him back. He turned and tried to kill me again. Again, I cut him and defeated him without killing him. This repeated a few times. The last times, he would stay still for a while, as if thinking of a way to escape, and then he would try to distract me to flee. I smiled and thought, what a cowardly dragon. But in retrospect, he was alive because of that. Finally, on the 6th attempt, he didn't flee. He stayed still, staring at me, as if he were trying to understand me. I just watched him with Tsukikage at the ready. When he stared at me long enough, I spoke directly, looking into his eyes. You're mine from now on. The dragon began to accumulate fire in his mouth, but he stopped instantly when I raised Tsukikage. He really learned quickly, but it still wasn't enough. Now that I had a target, all that remained was repetition. I was going to conduct several types of training. He learned fast, but even so, before taking him to the group, I needed to be sure that there was no rebellious thought left in his mind. First, I would turn my back. At those moments, he attacked me. I would disappear with a flash step and beat him again. I repeated that until he stopped attacking. Then, until he stopped fleeing. So I did this in my sleep. I slept soundly beside him. Obviously, he attacked me or tried to flee. I would wake in a blink of an eye and beat him black and blue again. This phase took a little longer, but, as I had already said, he adapted quickly. He quickly learned what he needed to do to avoid being beaten and killed, and what he couldn't do. The days passed. I would take him around. When another wandering dragon appeared, I brutally killed it. That also served to teach him what would happen if he resisted too much. Sometimes I would tell him to run. He had some intelligence. After looking at me, confused for a few moments, he would take off flying or running. I let him feel free again, and then I captured him again. When he returned, he tried to flee again, for he had experienced freedom once more. But I taught him again that he couldn't escape. He couldn't. Little by little, Using various tactics of psychological manipulation and animal training from my previous world, I slowly brainwashed him. When he did something I liked, I gave him meat and healed his wounds. When he fled or acted violently toward me, I beat him and didn't heal his wounds. The classic of rewarding good actions and punishing bad actions. But this was a red dragon. That required me to constantly show that I could finish him off at any moment. They were intelligent, but still, taming such a wild creature took time. That was one of the reasons I chose a dragon that adapted quickly, so I could quickly teach him who was in charge. 2 weeks passed quickly. I cleaned him of the crusts of dirt and mud that had been there since who knows when. The dragon became furious. I beat him. I sent him to hunt for me. He, reluctantly, obeyed and left. When he hunted and thought I wasn't watching, he began to eat. I appeared and beat him. I repeated that several times in an almost mechanical cycle. The red dragon, which before had shown itself fierce and unpredictable, was now much calmer. No matter how far he went or how well he hid, I always found him, for I had already memorized his scent. I even let him hit me with his fire, but I prepared a powerful fire barrier around me, invisible to his eyes. He launched his burst of flames, expecting to see me charred, but the surprise was on him. I was unharmed, the fire barrier protecting me without him noticing. To deepen his frustration, on another occasion I inflicted several wounds on myself on purpose. He looked at me, injured, hesitated due to the constant traps, questioned himself, but at some point, finally, attacked again. And it was in his attack that he understood. Nothing he did could stop me. I swiftly got up and he saw his attacks fail, while I quickly regenerated the wounds and beat him again. The dragon, especially intelligent and cowardly, realized he had no choice left. He had no control over what was happening. I wasn't there to destroy him, but to force him to adapt to my will. He resisted, but deep down, he understood he was lost. I knew he wasn't completely submissive or loyal yet. I knew that if given the chance, he would flee. But I wasn't planning to completely tame him that quickly. For now, that was enough to ensure he wouldn't attack the group at night. He behaved in an acceptable, controlled manner. That was something. One day, I looked at him and said, "That's enough. Let's go." It was at that moment that I took the Mad Dragon King's sealing chains and placed them around his neck, ensuring that he couldn't gather mana to unleash his fiery breath. His confidence was further shaken by that. Upon feeling the weight of the chains, the big red dragon recoiled, feeling that control over him had been even more reinforced. Then I grabbed the bag with the magical cores and fangs of the dragons I had killed. With that, I headed out, and the red dragon was at my heels. During those 2.5 weeks, I was very busy, but I also had time to think. My fury was still alive, but the fight against the other wandering dragons provided a perfect outlet to relieve the tension that had been building inside me since the encounter with the dragon god. We ran back, and at one point during the journey, I rode on his back. I had already tried to make him fly while riding him before, but I soon realized that it was much more complicated than it seemed. He didn't fly easily, which left the passengers with problems balancing. He still wasn't trained enough to fly easily. I would need to work on his flying skills before trying again, and if possible, build a cage. But at least I knew it was possible. Gradually, we approached the group. He ran on the ground quickly. When I saw a skull in the distance, he was advancing at full speed, clearly with a murderous intent in his posture. But upon seeing me riding the dragon, he stopped, cautious. Without showing further aggression, he waited, probably analyzing the situation. I couldn't help but wonder who would win in a fight. The dragon was much larger, but Skull had his rank A classification mainly due to his speed and endurance. Then I moved closer and saw Aerys training with Ghislaine ahead. I thought to myself, all right, I still have a lot to protect, even in the Great Forest. Idar's death had been an unexpected blow, a proof that I was still not capable of protecting those I care about. However, from another perspective, it was also a warning of the constant dangers that lurk in this world. Aerys approached, excited. Ghislaine was on guard, ready to act at any moment, and Lilia, cautious as always, watched intently. Aisha, beside them, had her eyes shining with curiosity. When Aerys came closer, the dragon almost began to act aggressively. However, I caught his attention with a shock, reminding him who was in control there. The dragon stopped immediately. Aerys, watching everything in awe, asked excitedly, "What's his name?" I froze for a moment. I hadn't yet given the dragon a name. I looked at the dragon, thought quickly, and then leaped from his back. I signaled for him to lower his head, and the two pairs of golden eyes met. I smiled and, in a firm tone, said, "His name is Escalation." The dragon looked back at me, with a deep meaning in his eyes. He understood. He comprehended that he had been named. That would be his name, Escalation. Finally, the first dragon had been captured and domesticated. Of course, we still needed to completely tame it, break that last trace of resistance in its eyes, and maybe make it see us as companions. That was going well. Time was doing its work, and fear too. One day, to test the limits of that proud beast, I decided to leave the group for several hours. It was left to travel with the others, free from my constant shadow. And to my satisfaction, it did not flee. After a while, I extended the test. I was away for 2 whole days, without any sign. During that time, I continued observing from afar. And as expected, it tried. In the middle of the second night, in absolute silence, it rose and began to move away from the group's trail. But it did not count on Ghislaine. She pursued it like a voracious shadow. No sound, no warning. When I returned and saw the scene, the dragon was on the brink of death, its eyes wide with pure terror, panting while lying on the ground, covered in cuts and abrasions. After that, it seemed uninterested in fleeing. There was something in its eyes. Perhaps it was resignation. Maybe it had finally understood that there was no escape, that every attempt would only result in suffering. The only thing that still seemed to bother was the way Aerys treated it, as if it were a pet. It, for its part, always maintained the serious and intimidating expression of a dragon. But in the end, it did nothing. It did not roar, did not attack, did not protest. It merely accepted its fate. And truth be told, it was not treated badly. There was always fresh water thanks to water magic, and it and Skull had become our primary hunters. Every day, they went out together to hunt. Skull, however, seemed to be trying too hard. He probably thought he could lose his position if he did not show enough utility to the group. Anyway, the days passed. Gradually, we crossed the Mushoku region, an area known for its low hills and crystal-clear rivers, and finally arrived at the province of Milbots. We continued searching for information in every adventurer's guild we passed by, anything about Paul, Zenith, Rudius, or Hilda, Aerys' mother, but we found nothing. And then, it was decided that Lilia would leave the group and return to her father's dojo. After telling me that Aisha could go with us to the Sword Sanctuary, Lilia had spoken with Aisha in private. They talked for a long time. I did not know the content of their conversation, nor did I ask, but after that, it was basically decided that Aisha would go with us to the Sword Sanctuary. It was Aisha's choice, although it was probably related to what Lilia had told her. Thus, we continued our journey. Obviously, entering a city with a red dragon was not an option. Skull already attracted attention and was stopped by guards several times, with his 4 meters of height and piercing eyes. But a red dragon? That was a sign of calamity in any region of that kingdom. The mere presence of Escalation would put the whole city on alert. So, only Rigger, Lilia, and Aisha would enter, with Aerys and Ghislaine staying with Escalation and Skull. Before that, Lilia said goodbye to Ghislaine, Aerys, and Skull. She had become especially close to Ghislaine on this trip. She also whispered something in Aerys' ear before leaving, to which Aerys reacted only with a slight smile and a nod. Rigger could have heard it, but he did not mind. They headed toward the center of the city of Limar. The streets were lively, with people coming and going, the smell of warm food and spices filling the air. Lilia seemed to look around with a mix of nostalgia and longing. Aisha was visibly excited. She skipped alongside Lilia, pulling her by the hand and asking questions about what her grandparents were like. Rigger followed alongside, alert but silent. It was not long before they spotted the dojo, a traditional building with a dark wooden roof and walls reinforced by simple but firm columns. Sounds of wooden swords clashing echoed inside. Lilia stopped in front of the door. She was visibly nervous, hesitant. She held Aisha's hand, who looked at her curiously, trying to understand the reason for that sudden stop. Rigger observed her for a moment, without saying anything. And then, he simply moved ahead. With a firm impulse, he kicked the dojo door wide open. The hinges creaked loudly, and everyone inside immediately turned around. Silence. Practitioners with wooden swords in hand froze mid-motion. Instructors frowned. Everyone's eyes fell on Rigger, who walked into the dojo as if he owned the place. The sunlight at his back made him seem even more intimidating. Lilia, right behind, was with wide, shocked eyes. Aisha laughed, finding it all extremely amusing, and Rigger simply walked inside, as if nothing unusual was happening. A tall man, with an imposing stature, muscles sculpted by a life dedicated to the sword, approached Rigger's group. His reddish-brown hair revealed the blood he shared with Lilia. His eyes, for a moment, carried only astonishment and a natural distrust toward the unknown. "Who are you?" he asked, with a firm voice and tense posture, his eyes fixed on the figure of Rigger who had entered the dojo. But then he froze. His eyes wavered, widening upon seeing the woman behind the intruder. Next to her, a miniature version of Lilia facing her grandfather for the first time. "Lilia?" She smiled, a soft smile, touched with contained emotion. "Father!" The man went to her without hesitation and enveloped her in a tight hug, his strong arms trembling slightly. Aisha, holding Lilia's hand, watched everything with big, curious eyes. Meanwhile, Rigger looked aside, noticing the dojo practitioners beginning to approach, bewildered and intrigued. Then he raised his voice. "Come on, let's not interfere with a family reunion." His eyes shone with confidence as he took a step forward. "My name is Rigger Dedoldia, a North King." Silence fell over the dojo like a sudden snowstorm. "I challenge all of you at the same time to a fight," Rigger continued, his voice firm, a slight defiant smile on his face. "Anyone who lands a single blow on me, without me using my sword, I will appoint as the North Saint." Murmurs began immediately. One of the practitioners, with wide eyes, murmured, "A North King of the bestial race, golden eyes and silver hair. Wait, are you the Red Wolf?" It seemed it was true that rumors and stories ran faster than the wind. During that month in the Dragon King's realm, Rigger had become known even in other kingdoms. Rigger smiled. "It's me." One of the young men couldn't resist. Propelled by the promise of being named North Saint, he attacked, and like a spark thrown on dry straw, the others followed. Augusto, still embracing his daughter, watched the scene, astonished. "But what?" "Go, master!" shouted Aisha, jumping excitedly. Lilia sighed. "Forget this, father. Let's go inside." With a slight push, she led Augusto to the back of the dojo, the area that was also the family's home. Meanwhile, Rigger faced the practitioners with skill. No blow would leave permanent marks, but all would make bones and muscles ache for days. Several minutes later, everyone was on the ground, breathless, sore, some with eyes wide in disbelief. Rigger sat among them, legs crossed, arms resting on his knees, and conversing with them about various things. "In general, would you say that your instructor Augusto and Mrs. Flute are good people?" he said, observing the sweaty faces around him. One of the practitioners, holding the side of his body with an expression of contained pain, still had the courage to look Rigger in the eyes. "Yes, sir." Rigger pondered, then nodded. "Okay, thank you for your cooperation." He then approached the young man, touched his wound with 2 fingers, and healed it. "Unfortunately, none of you became a North Saint today, but I must say, you are not bad at all." The eyes of the defeated shone with pride. Some smiled, even without strength to get up. Others even thanked him. While Rigger walked toward the house, he thought to himself, being strong is quite convenient. In what kind of place can you beat everyone and they still thank you for it? But he set that thought aside as he approached the back door. Inside, Lilia, Aisha, Augusto, and Flute were seated at the table. The scene was warm and peaceful. Flute was a woman with a firm, yet gentle expression. Her features were very much like Lilia's, and, by extension, like Aisha's. Upon seeing Rigor enter, Augusto stood up and went to him. "Rigor Dedoldia, I must thank you for saving my daughter and my granddaughter Emily's." Rigor shook his hand firmly. "Do not worry about that. Aisha is my disciple now. We are closer than that." Augusto seemed satisfied with the answer. "Come, sit down." The conversation extended for hours. They talked about Lilia's journey, about the dangers faced, about the small and big achievements. They were impressed with the Iron Legion. When the subject turned to Aisha going to the Sword Sanctuary, Flute showed some discomfort and said that she thought Aisha should stay with them. Augusto agreed. But Lilia spoke up and cut them off, saying that it had already been decided. Flute was somewhat in a bad mood, but did not continue insisting. Overall, the conversation was very pleasant, except of course for the parts that mentioned that Paul, Zenith, and Rudius were still missing. Lilia had previously told Rigor that she had never told her parents about being raped by Paul, and since she preferred to keep it a secret, he wouldn't be the one to interfere in family disputes. Aisha asked many questions about everything concerning her grandparents, and they were more than happy to entertain their cute granddaughter. Augusto sighed, then smiled slightly at Rigor. "You are quite unbelievable. Sword King and North King. Water Saint, and yet proficient in various types of non-enchanted magic." He looked at Lilia. "If you weren't here to attest it, I would never believe it. It's great that someone like you has chosen Aisha as your disciple." Lilia just smiled confidently. Rigor only replied, "It's Aisha's talent that attracted me. The credit is hers." Augusto turned to Rigor once again. "I was very happy to meet my granddaughter, and I thank you once again for saving them. He paused for a moment, his voice faltering. "Want to spend more time with her, but I know that is just the selfish request of a grandfather." Then he took a deep breath. "I will write to Rida, letting her know that you will be going to the Sword Sanctuary. She will probably be interested in a talent like yours." Rigor nodded with a slight smile. "Thank you for that. I have always been interested in the secret techniques of the god of water style." Idar's name was not mentioned. That was a night for reunions, for restore bonds. Mentioning his death would make the atmosphere sad again. Rigor also discovered something curious. The current water god, Rida Rhea and Eleonora, Idar's grandmother who was in the Great Forest, had both been senior disciples of Augusto. The three had known each other since youth and were old friends. The next day, Rigor and Aisha were ready to leave. The morning sun began to illuminate the narrow and quiet streets around the dojo when Augusto and Flute came to the entrance with several packages in their hands. Clothes, a new pair of reinforced boots, since it was cold in the north, homemade sweets, and even a lucky charm made by Flute. Aisha was the center of all attention and was loving it. Flute held her as if she did not want to let go, smoothing her brown hair. Lilia, on the other hand, was emotional but tried not to show it. Her eyes were red, and she seemed unable to stop talking. "Stay close to Rigor. And to Ghislaine, always. Do everything he tells you, Aisha. Train hard. Focus. Do not get distracted. Eat well. Come back to visit. Please." She bent down and hugged her tightly. Aisha, quiet, only returned the hug with her little arms around her mother's neck. But she held back her own tears and did not cry. But Rigor saw her fingers gripping Lilia's clothing tightly. Since the conversation she had with Lilia, Rigor noticed that there was something different in her, a spark of silent determination, which made him a little more curious about the content of the conversation. Shortly after, Rigor placed Aisha on his shoulders. She settled easily, her arms crossed over his head and her gaze fixed ahead. "Thank you for everything," Rigor said, looking at Lilia, Augusto, and Flute. Augusto only nodded with a serious look. Lilia forced a smile, waving her hand. "Be careful. Don't let her do anything too dangerous. Of course, after all, she is my disciple." Rigor replied calmly, before turning around. And then, they left the city without looking back. The road stretched out before them, and there was no longer any reason to go through ours. With Idar dead, the path now went straight to Fatoa. The weight of the recent events still hung over their thoughts, but for now, Rigor kept his focus ahead. There was much to teach, and Aisha, his disciple, was ready to begin. Our group got smaller again. At least this time, it was an appropriate farewell. Without Lilia, our group again seemed a little different, as if something was missing, but we prepared for that unlike when Idar left us. We continued our journey, this time heading toward Fatoa. Even without entering cities with Escalor, we passed by roads, trade trails, and smaller settlements that dotted the central region of the kingdom of Azura. It didn't matter how far from the main road we were. The simple silhouette of the vibrant red dragon was enough to cause a commotion. I lost count of how many merchants abandoned their carts and ran off. Terrified travelers dismounted their mounts in a hurry. On some occasions, braver warriors prepared to fight, until they realized that there was a group of people in a cart, calmly walking right in front of the creature. It was always the same cycle: fright, tension, confusion, and then came the explanation. At first, Rigor took it upon himself to calmly explain that Escalor was a tamed dragon under his command. He explained how he had managed that, demonstrated with small commands, and made it clear, above all, that there was no danger. But as the encounters became more frequent, he began to delegate. Sometimes it was Aerys who spoke. Other times he himself. Ghislaine also tried, but neither of the two girls was exactly communicative. "He tamed it," said Ghislaine, with a serious expression. "It's a pet," Aerys added, crossing her arms with a proud expression. Obviously, those answers didn't explain anything. Fortunately, Aisha was always nearby to translate. Even at 4 years old, she already understood the basics of social etiquette and knew how to put into words what the two warriors left hanging in the air. "Our dragon is not aggressive and doesn't attack anyone without my master's command. It's like a horse, only much bigger. See? It's obeying perfectly," she said, excited, her eyes shining as she demonstrated. No matter how tiring it was, Rigor took the trouble to explain every time, not only to avoid immediate disasters, but because he wanted to build a solid reputation. If in the future Escalor were seen in another region, or if he himself were passing by here with him, he wanted people to already know who he was, and that the name of the tamed dragon was linked to him. These merchants and travelers to whom he explained, if only one of them told the story, it wouldn't have much effect, but if they were all of them, people would start to give credibility to the story. It was at this part of the journey that the nicknames began to emerge. Because of Skull, the enormous ebony wolf, and now of Escalor, some people began to call him the Monster Tamer. Others called him the Beast King. Rigor didn't mind. Meanwhile, Escalor was progressing in his flight training. It is worth noting that he had tried to flee by air a few times in the past, but he discovered that it was very dangerous, since Rigor would hit his wings with bursts of ice, wind, earth, among others. Either way, that would result in him falling in free fall. As a young dragon, he was already capable of flying long distances. His endurance was great, but he lacked mastery when it came to taking off and performing more complex maneuvers. But with encouragement and under Rigor's guidance, he improved every day. And it was in this process that Rigor had his first success with gravity magic. He observed the dragon flying for hours, attentive to the movement patterns, to the way the wings managed the construction of the anti-gravity field. Then, he tried to reproduce the theory with his mana several times. It lasted only for an instant, a light, unstable tug that made a small stone float just for an instant before dissipating. But even that small breakthrough was a milestone. We crossed several villages and agricultural fields, and in all regions the pattern repeated, people running, startled by the sight of a dragon. Until one day, already halfway to the north of Azura, we were intercepted. A group of knights came within Rigor's senses. There were about 20 of them, armed with banners of the kingdom of Azura. They formed a blockade line in front of the road, hidden in a classic formation to ambush monsters. They had clearly been sent as an extermination group, probably after alarming reports about the presence of a red dragon traveling around. But at least the leader was smart. When we approached, and he saw us walking calmly in front of the creature, He signaled for his men not to attack. Then he cautiously approached the group alone. His eyes narrowed when he saw Ghislaine, seeming to recognize her. Ghislaine Dedoldia. He hesitated for a second. Then you must be Rigor Dedoldia. Are you traveling with this? After a long conversation and a well-controlled demonstration of Escalar's obedience, I explained that the dragon was under my command and that we would take it with us beyond the kingdom of Azura to the north of the central continent. The knight pondered for a while. Very well, but to ensure there are no problems, 5 of my men will accompany you until you cross Azura's borders. I had no objection. With me here, that simply wasn't necessary, but this guy had a mission, so he had to at least do something to report to his superiors. The 5 knights began to follow us from a distance, mounted on their horses and always alert. Meanwhile, our routine continued as normal. Aisha was currently helping Aerys with math. No, older sister. It's 16. If you had to divide 64 coins among 4 people, it would be impossible to give 30 to each. Aerys frowned, visibly irritated. That's boring. I already know how to add and subtract. These divisions and multiplications are useless. But it's important. Aisha insisted. Ghislaine and I watched from afar, until Aerys huffed. I'm not going to use this for anything. I have Rigor and you to do these calculations. Aisha puffed out her cheeks. Even at 4 years old, she mastered all the basic calculations with impressive ease. But we won't always be there. And if you're alone, Aerys crossed her arms and said in a triumphant tone, then I can call Rigor. Even in another city, he will listen to me. Aisha was shocked by the logic. Meanwhile, Ghislaine and I talked about other things. It's incomprehensible why people put such individuals in power. I commented with a certain disdain in my voice. I mean, even an advanced-level warrior could kill most of the Azura nobles, and even the king, if left unchecked. We were talking about the nobles and important figures of the kingdom of Azura, and even of the other kingdoms. Ghislaine, with half-closed eyes, replied, Once Lord Philip told me that there were 2 basic paths in life, that of the strong and that of the intellectuals. He told me that the strong always ended up serving the intellectuals. I raised an eyebrow. That's ridiculous. The ideal for a leader is to be strong and intelligent. Ghislaine seemed to think, then said, so if you could choose only one, would you say that to be a good leader, someone needs to be stronger or more intelligent? I fell silent for a moment before answering, intelligent. Ghislaine smiled victoriously. Azura and other kingdoms have remained that way for a long time. I sighed. That was true. I myself wanted to go to Azura and kill everyone I disliked, but I wasn't able. Ours might be rotten to the core, but he knew there were many dangers there. The water goddess, the emperors of the north and of the water, king-level fighters, and who knows how many secret magics hidden under the palace or protected by unknown items. After all, it was the capital of the greatest kingdom in the world. I couldn't simply invade and kill them all now. But maybe I could in the future. My eyes turned to the horizon, as if they could pierce mountains and walls and see directly into the rotten heart of the kingdom of Azura. If, for example, Rida Araya woke up one day and wanted to change who was in power, how easy would it be for her to do that? I asked, not really expecting an answer. Ghislaine just smiled. Few people think like you in the entire world. Killing kings is a very big deal. I returned the smile with one of my own. Maybe, after a few more days of travel, we finally entered the region of Fitoa. The knights continued following them from a distance, without making contact. The place was now deserted and silent. The atmosphere was oppressive. Almost 2 months had passed since the encounter with the dragon god. During that time, after the mourning, after the pain, everyone resumed their training with redoubled determination. No one talked much about what had happened, but the absence of Idar still weighed heavily. And with Lilia's departure, the group seemed even emptier. Even so, there was something different in those who remained. After everything, there was a new shine in them, a conviction that wasn't there before. Even little Aisha was training her magic with more dedication. Aerys came to me frequently, asking me to heal her fatigue after long training sessions. And as soon as she felt her strength return, she went back to training without hesitation. Ghislaine and I didn't stop either. Our training continued with even greater intensity. Aerys frequently challenged me, and I faced her without using my tuki, as promised. She was improving faster than ever. With Aisha, things were even better. I finished teaching all the elemental and intermediate spells of attack magic. She learned at a surprising speed, so we began barrier, healing, detoxification, and divine attack magic. She showed a special affinity for barrier, healing, earth, and water magic, in that order. In the carriage, as we followed the empty roads, we finally saw the Fatoa refugee camp in the distance. I think it was where Roa was before the disaster. We got close, and I left Skoll and Escalation outside the refugee camp. I didn't worry about locking up the Red Dragon or anything like that. I had already captured him in even tougher situations, and he had long since convinced himself that he could never escape. It seemed he had already adapted to this life. Then, we entered the refugee camp. Aisha, as always, looked at everything with curiosity. Aerys said, "Ghislaine, this is..." Aerys pointed to a mural. At the top of the mural was the name, Lord Sovereign of Fitoa, James Boreas Greyrat, and beside it, search situation information, deceased or missing. Below were the names of the missing after the incident, listed in alphabetical order by village and city. Ghislaine said, "Let's look at that later." And Aerys nodded, "Yes." The list of the dead was incredibly long. Moreover, the Lord Sovereign mentioned in the header of the document was no longer Soros, since he was dead. We headed into the building. When we gave the names of Aerys, Ghislaine, and Aisha at the counter, the middle-aged woman attending quickly slid back. Then she returned with a middle-aged man in her wake. He was bearded and had white hair, wearing clothes that seemed a little fancier than those of a common citizen. Ghislaine greeted him, "Alphonse." "Miss Ghislaine, Lady Aerys." He bowed briefly to Aerys and looked at me. "Lord Rigger, I've heard a lot about you. On behalf of the Boreas family, I thank you for helping Lady Aerys return. I will ensure that you are duly rewarded." I said, "There's no need." I looked at Ghislaine. "If you know about me, you must know that Ghislaine Dedoldia is now my wife. I hope you choose your words carefully in the conversation that follows, because I don't care about Azuran nobility." I released a small pressure. He began to sweat cold and looked at Ghislaine, who did not refute Rigger's words, and after that, "Oh, of course. Let's come in." They then went further into the building. Aisha went along. I only warned him now, because Ghislaine told me that he was a loyal servant of the Boreas family, so it would be better if he at least knew that he wouldn't have much choice here. We sat around a table. Ghislaine looked at him and said, "Have you had any news of Lady Hilda?" Alphonse hesitated, and then said, "Lady Hilda remains missing. As you may already know, Lord Soros Boreas Greyrat and Philemon Boreas Greyrat are dead." Aerys clenched her fists. I just watched in silence while I played with Aisha. The butler looked at Ghislaine and hesitated for a moment, and finally said, "I'm the last servant of the Boreas Greyrat house." Ghislaine raised an eyebrow and said, "And all the others? They returned to their families or are dead. After all, we no longer have any real power to keep them." Ghislaine pondered and asked, "Which do you think would be the best course of action for Aerys?" The butler looked at me and said directly, "There are two options that I consider valid. First, it must be said that Lord James, the current ruler of Fitoa, will not accept her in his house. But Lord Philemon Nodo's Greyrat contacted me, saying that if Aerys had nowhere to go when she returned, he would take her as his concubine." Ghislaine frowned, and murderous intent leaked out. He was one of those responsible for Soros's death. The butler remained calm and said, "Even so, for us, only the political power he now holds is important. That would be the best for the region of Fitoa and for the Boreas house in the long run, since the faction of the Second Princess has lost its power and she recently fled the kingdom. Minister Darius is gaining power, and Lord Philemon seems to be on good terms with him." Aerys became extremely nervous, and the tension in the room built up. Meanwhile, I thought, are people blind? First, Ghislaine, a sword king, serving a random noble, the water goddess Rhea, serving the crown, And now they want to bury Aerys' talent by having her marry a random noble to obtain political power. I must be the crazy one here. Why does everyone seem to think that makes sense? The tension remained until I looked at him and naturally said, "Forget that idea. Aerys is not going to marry any noble to help save the name of a family that doesn't even exist anymore, and the region of Fitoa is not her responsibility." Aerys looked at me, somewhat surprised. The butler frowned and then said, "There is a second option, in which Aerys marries you, Lord Rigger." Ghislaine and I were shocked, but Aerys was even more so. She was in shock and asked, "How is that possible?" Aisha asked innocently, "Master, are we all going to marry you eventually?" Aerys blushed, and Rigger came to his senses and said to Aisha, "Cut the nonsense. Hey, where did you get that idea?" Alphonse explained calmly, "I know your power, Lord Rigger, but I'm more interested in your military organization. From the latest information I obtained, you forged an alliance with the Kingdom of the Dragon King, right?" Aerys was still red-faced, but calmed down. I didn't answer, and he continued, "Even if you're not human, the children you would have would also be of the Boreas lineage, and I'm sure it wouldn't be a problem to help the region of Fitoa rebuild. The stories about the great stone fortress built in Teniver with your magic extend here to the kingdom of Azura, and I'm sure that the kingdom of the Dragon King would help if you asked." Aerys became redder and redder as she thought more about the idea. Ghislaine found it funny and looked at me, who was confused, until I remembered my original objective when I came here and regained my senses. Right, I only intended to say that I would take Aerys away. How did it come to this? I looked at the butler. This guy really caught me off guard with that. I said, "We will evaluate the options. Let's go, girls." Ghislaine stood up, and Aerys strangely got up, avoiding looking at Rigger. Aisha ran ahead. If Rigger knew exactly what Aerys' fate would be after marrying Philemon, things might not have ended so well for the butler. As soon as Rigger, Ghislaine, Aerys, Aisha, and the others left the building, Rigger's ears suddenly perked up when his sixth sense warned him. One look, someone was watching them intently. With attentive eyes, he scanned the people ahead. People were walking hurriedly, children were running. Amid that constant flow, he located her. A woman cloaked in a gray mantle, hiding her body and hair, had stopped upon noticing the group, and, after recognizing them, she began to approach step by step. Rigger felt no hostility, but the woman was clearly coming to speak with them. "Ghislaine," he said, catching his companion's attention. "Do you know that woman? She's coming here." Ghislaine looked in the direction Rigger indicated, while next to them, Aisha teased Aerys, who was still visibly embarrassed due to Alphonse's proposal. The redhead tried to maintain her composure while silencing the little one. The woman approached with calm steps. Ghislaine furrowed her brow. "She seems familiar," she finally said, "but I can't place her." When the woman finally stopped before them, her eyes turned directly to Aerys. Her voice sounded gentle. "Excuse me, are you by any chance Aerys Boreas Greyrat?" Aerys, who at that moment was holding Aisha's mouth to stop her from continuing the teasing, widened her eyes in surprise. Her hand let go, and she replied in a hesitant tone, Yes, I am." The woman slightly tilted her head. "You look very different. I knew you when you were very little." She then diverted her gaze to Ghislaine. "I was entrusted with delivering this letter to Aerys Boreas Greyrat, or to Ghislaine Dedoldia, if I found her first, so that you would deliver it to her." Ghislaine narrowed her eyes, still confused. "And who sent the letter?" The woman slid her hand inside her cloak, retrieving a carefully folded envelope. It was Lady Hilda Boreas Greyrat. The impact of the name was immediate. Ghislaine, Aerys, and Rigger exchanged surprised looks. Ghislaine stepped forward half a pace, her voice growing more intense. "Where is she?" The woman was startled by the sudden reaction and took a small step back, raising her hands in a defensive gesture. "I don't know. I didn't open the letter, I swear. She just told me that Alphonse would probably lie about her situation to coerce Aerys into marrying or something like that. She paid me to wait here for 5 years and to deliver this letter if she appeared, since I have family here and I was really going to stay. I accepted." Rigor analyzed every micro-expression of the woman. Her breathing, the sweat, her heartbeat, and everything indicated that she was telling the truth. After a few seconds of silence, he nodded slightly. She's not lying. Ghislaine relaxed her shoulders, taking a deep breath. Her gaze softened a bit. Thank you. The woman shrugged, with a carefree smile on her face. Just business. I got paid for 5 years and only worked for 2. And then, with a casual wave, she turned and began to move away through the crowd, gradually disappearing among the passers-by. Everyone turned to Aerys. Aisha was very curious. Ghislaine observed silently, and Rigor maintained a neutral yet interested expression. Aerys, on the other hand, held the letter with both hands. Her fingers trembled slightly, her eyes fixed on the sealed paper. She was a bit nervous. Big sister. Let's go already, said Aisha, impatient. The redhead took a deep breath, staring at the letter as if it might explode in her hands. And finally, with trembling fingers, she broke the seal and unfolded the paper. The letter read as follows. To Aerys, how are you, daughter? I hope you are well. If you received this letter, at least you are alive. That's good. I made this arrangement because I was sure that Alphonse would try to hide from you what I told him to tell you. First of all, in the teleportation incident, I was teleported to the Duchy of Basharant in the north of the central continent. After selling my jewels and belongings that were with me, I rented a place to stay and began working as a temporary receptionist in an adventurer's guild for a while to earn money. Apparently, no one recognized me as a noble, so I couldn't get guards to escort me back to Azura. I stayed there for a few months until I found a group of adventurers who were traveling to the kingdom of Azura. I joined them. A swordswoman in the group even taught me a bit of fighting. Anyway, I was somewhat lucky. From what I heard, many others had terrible fates. When I arrived, your grandfather, Soros, had just been executed, and the news that your father had been found dead in a labyrinth in Chiron had just arrived. Alphonse told me that I should become the concubine of a minor noble to help the Boreas household. But do not accept anything he proposes, Aerys. You have no responsibilities to fulfill with Fitoa. And with your father and grandfather dead, neither do I. After leaving those arrangements, I fled back to the Duchy of Basharant, so I believe that Alphonse would lie to you to try to take advantage. I became an adventurer along with the group that traveled with me. I already have connections and a place to stay there in the city of Hyler. I know I wasn't a good mother to you, Aerys, and I want you to know that I deeply regret it now. If you have nowhere else to go, I ask that you consider coming to the Duchy of Basharant and living with me. If you are with Ghislaine and want to become an adventurer, or if you are with someone else and already have a place to go or stay, I ask that you at least send a letter letting me know you are safe. But do not accept any proposal from Alphonse. Your grandfather and your father have already died because of this calamity. Our family has nothing more to owe the kingdom of Azura. Anyway, Aerys, I am so sorry for having been a terrible mother, but I want you to know that I love you. P.S. If Ghislaine is with you or reading the letter, I thank you for bringing Aerys back. Soros and Philip are already dead, so if Alphonse is trying to make you continue serving the Boreas household, as my last order as the wife of Philip Boreas Greyrat, I, Hilda Boreas Greyrat, release you from your services and responsibilities with the Boreas household, and I thank you for the time you served us. As one last selfish request, I ask, please take care of Aerys if she wishes to stay with you. If you are a stranger who helped Aerys, I thank you deeply. I know it's an irrational request, but I hope you can help her settle or travel to the Duchy of Basharant. I will do my best to reward you for that. Signed, Hilda Greyrat. Rigor smiled. Well, it seems that her mother is doing well. Aerys held the letter firmly, her eyes brimming and silent. Ghislaine, looking over Aerys's shoulder, murmured in surprise. Lady Hilda seems very different. Rigor furrowed his brow, curious. How so? Ghislaine smiled slightly, her eyes full of distant memories. She was much more stern and cold than that, for what I remember, of course. I would have never imagined her writing a letter like this, or even considering being an adventurer. But she pointed to the end of the letter. This is indeed the symbol of the House of Boreas. Rigger fell silent for a moment, contemplating the implications. Well, at least her mother doesn't want her to marry a noble. Not that that was ever really an option. He then turned to Aerys. Anyway, the decision is still yours, Aerys. Do you want to go live with your mother, or follow us to the sword sanctuary? Aerys seemed to hesitate for a moment and murmured, but what about Alphonse's other options? Her expression turned a bit discontented, and she walked away with a slight, ill-humored huff. Ghislaine couldn't help but smile at the young one's expression. Rigger thought, it can't be. Was she planning to accept Alphonse's second proposal and marry me? Aerys clenched her fists and proclaimed loudly, of course I'm going with you all to the sword sanctuary. I can visit my mother any time after that. Rigger realized that, even with the moving letter, Aerys still harbored some apprehension about her mother. But she didn't seem to mind that much. He nodded with satisfaction. Very well. We leave tomorrow morning. He then turned his eyes toward the refugee camp that stretched ahead. Hundreds of makeshift tents and fragile structures spread in all directions, like poorly healed scars on the land. Families trying to reorganize after the disaster. Rigger took a deep breath and murmured, first, I'm going to lend a hand here. With the sun descending on the horizon, Rigger began his work. Using advanced, saint and king-level earth magic, especially the powerful Colossus Fortress. He erected the first structures, solid, practical, and functional. They were not castles or intricate and resilient fortresses like the base of the Iron Legion, but housing complexes with simplicity and efficiency. The walls emerged from the earth, windows formed by magical molds, and roofs appeared molded with fur magic. The magic flowed from his arms like rivers of silent power. The construction, even though it was quick, demanded concentration and adjustments. After all, it was not a war fortress. It was a home for ordinary people. After a while, a short, elderly man in carpenter's clothes approached and began asking for more specific directions: stables, protective walls, moats, storage areas. He spoke without restraint and with boldness. He seemed to know a lot about construction and knew what they needed most in that refugee camp. Rigger respected that, and under his instructions, he shaped the structures with precision. Everything was ready a few hours later. Simple houses, larger buildings to shelter several families, artificial wells with clean water, basic defensive structures, rustic weapons made of stone hardened with magic. While I was building, the people gathered and whispered in some shout of my name. When we finally finished, they were raising their arms, running through the new streets, emotional. Many cried. Others prayed. They were calling him savior, hero, even a god. Rigger, used to this kind of exaggerated reaction when he used his magic on such a scale, raised a hand and gave a brief speech, promoting the Iron Legion. Perhaps he could recruit some good members here. Then, he smiled, waved, and departed. He did all this casually, but would earn him enormous fame among the people of Fitoa. He had done it for two reasons. First, the most important, because he could. It cost him nothing, and those people were victims of natural disaster who only wanted to rebuild. Since he could help so easily, he saw no reason not to do it. The second reason was more practical, to silence Alphonse. The old butler might try to oppose Aerys and Ghislaine's departure. Not that his opposition would amount to anything even if he did nothing, of course. But after this help, he would have no argument. With everything ready, Rigger ran through the newly built streets, crossing the field transformed into a village. Upon reaching the carriage, he found Aerys, Ghislaine, and Aisha already waiting. Aside from the two monsters in the group, now I'm the only man. You're missed, Idar, he thought with a half-smile. Seeing him, Aisha cheered. Master, is it true that you can build a bridge in the middle of the ocean? Rigger almost choked. What? Who told you that? Aisha pointed at Aerys, who folded her arms and nodded, as if she had won a debate. Didn't you build all of this in one day? It may take a while, but a bridge, you could do it. Rigger scratched his neck, a bit embarrassed. Technically, maybe it's possible between two ports, but in open sea it's much more difficult. No bridge holds without support. I would have to create enormous pillars all the way to the seabed. That would take a long time. And, Well, we don't even know what lies in the depths. Aisha spoke with conviction. I knew it. Aerys seemed displeased. But you'll manage it someday, won't you? Rigger looked at her for a moment, reflecting. Yes, actually, I'm planning something like that. Aerys turned to Aisha with a victorious look and walked away aimlessly without saying a word. Big sister, Aisha called. We're leaving. Where are you going? Aerys froze mid-step, huffed, and silently returned, boarding the carriage. Aisha turned to Rigger, smiling. Be gentle with Aerys. Aisha, he said. Aisha's expression changed. She became more serious and replied, Yes, master. Then, she too boarded the carriage. Rigger approached Ghislaine, who was gazing into the horizon, watching the refugees organizing. Thinking about your time working here, he asked. She turned with a small smile. Yes. Rigger climbed into the carriage seat and began guiding the animals. Did you speak with the butler? I did, replied Ghislaine. He didn't agree, but he also had no power to stop us. So, to avoid angering the nobles by saying she ran away from the marriage, he will officially declare that Aerys Boreas Greyrat is dead. Now, she is only Aerys Greyrat. She pondered for a moment and said, He also seemed calmer after seeing the things you were building. Rigger smiled and looked ahead down the road. So, now, on to the sword sanctuary? Ghislaine took one last look at the village behind them, and then smiled with the wind on her face. Yes, to the sword sanctuary. And so, the group departed from their last stop. Aerys, Aisha, Ghislaine, Rigger, Skull, Escalation. Together, they crossed the continent towards the far north of the central continent. During their journey, they had gained new members, lost others, faced epic battles, crossed seas, mountains, cities, caves, and forests. They captured a dragon and were almost massacred by the dragon god. Now, after resolving the situation of Aerys and her family, no urgency pursued them. No immediate shadow threatened them. Only the sound of the carriage wheels on the road and the wind blowing toward the sword sanctuary. The place known only as the sword sanctuary was located at the far north, in a harsh and unforgiving region, covered in snow all year long. This was the location where the first sword god chose to establish his school, and where he spent his final years training the most skilled swordsmen. In current times, the sanctuary had become the preferred destination for those seeking to perfect their technique. Swordsmen from all over the world came there, men and women, seeking not only mastery of the sword but also the wisdom and spirit that accompanied training under the gaze of the sword god. It was a place from which many new talents emerged, and anyone who truly wished to study the path of the sword was encouraged to make at least a pilgrimage to that sacred location. Rigger and his group's arrival at the sanctuary was silent. The eternal and unchanging snow stretched out in all directions, reflecting a white, cold light. They advanced without haste. Aerys seemed determined. By her side, Aisha was anxious. Along the way, she asked Rigger several times when she could begin her fencing training. And Rigger each time said it would be soon, but that only made her more anxious. In truth, Rigger was planning to first finish teaching her all the healing class spells up to the intermediate level before beginning her sword training. When the group reached the entrance of the sanctuary, the guards looked at Skull and Escalation with a mix of shock and despair. The imposing black-furred wolf and the red dragon, with its enormous wingspan, were intimidating and unexpected presences in that terrain. Just as they were about to react, one of them had already run off, and Rigger stopped them by conjuring an earth wall in front of them. After explaining the situation to them, the guards, still perplexed, nodded, allowing them to pass without further delay. Skull and Escalation stayed behind. The dragons seemed to be looking for a place among the mountains to settle. Then, at the sword sanctuary, the return of the Sword King, Ghislaine Dedoldia, was announced. She had been one of the greatest swordsmen of the sanctuary when she was here. Many still remembered her. Ghislaine then requested an audience with her master, Galfarion, the sword god. She also wrote a short letter telling a bit about Rigger and Aerys. The news spread through the place with extreme speed. Aerys was watching the practitioners train, most of them younger, around Aerys's age, but none of them reached her skill. In particular, there was a blue-haired girl who seemed especially strong. After a while, under Rigger's leadership, the group entered the ephemeral hall, where the sixth among the seven great world powers, the sword god, Galfarion, awaited them. Rigger, now 13 years old, was approaching the height of Ghislaine at 1.77 m. He entered with a confident posture, alongside his companions, without hesitation. The hall was filled with swordsmen of the highest level. Everyone there was either a sword saint or even more, each with an aura that would make them stand out in ordinary settings. But here, they were ordinary. They were silent, observing the newcomers with critical eyes, waiting to see the visitors for themselves. Rigger and his group did not lower their heads or bow. They advanced with a calm that provoked discontent among some of those present. One of the sword saints, bothered by Ghislaine's attitude, shouted, "Hey, Ghislaine, you are in the presence of the sword god. Have you forgotten what you learned?" Before she could stand up to confront them, the sword god, Galfarion, raised his hand with an imposing gesture. "Silence," he said, his voice laden with authority. He looked at Rigger with interest, a gaze reflecting the curiosity of a master who recognized something peculiar in one of his visitors. Then, he turned his gaze to Ghislaine and said, "I see you have recovered your fangs, Ghislaine. I see in your eyes the desire to become stronger." Ghislaine grew serious and responded respectfully. "I only made it this far thanks to your teachings, Master." She paused, the weight of her words visible in her eyes. Then, she continued, looking at those present. "This girl is my disciple, Aerys Greyrat, and this is my partner, Rigger Dedoldia. The little one, Aisha Greyrat, is Rigger's disciple." Galfarion's gaze turned to Rigger, who remained unruffled, seemingly disinterested in him. The sword god could not help but provoke the young man. "I see you don't seem very pleased with me, boy," he said with a smile, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. Rigger observed him calmly, a deep and calculating look, before responding as if it were a fact. "First, I need to see if you're worthy of teaching me anything." The hall, which had until then been filled with tense silence, trembled at Rigger's response. Rigger didn't say this out of arrogance. Ghislaine had also been stronger than him when they first met, and he had asked her to be his master. But Ghislaine's answer was that she couldn't be his master because Rigger was already very close to her mastery, and she wouldn't have much to teach him. Rigger agreed with this. So, he would only accept the sword god as a master if the man possessed skills far beyond his own, at least in terms of swordsmanship. The other practitioners around couldn't believe what they had just heard. Several of them couldn't stand it and shouted in protest. "Who do you think you are? How outrageous! He's a sword god. Who are you?" The pressure increased even more, but, to everyone's surprise, Galfarion raised his hand, and everyone fell silent. He merely let out a low, deep laugh. His laugh reverberated through the hall, disarming the aggression in the air and forcing everyone into silence. The sword god watched him, controlling his laughter while looking at Rigger with interest. "Ghislaine described you as the most talented she has ever seen in the entire world, so I thought you might have some arrogance. But I'm curious. If not even I'm strong enough to impress you, who are you trying to reach?" Rigger's eyes shone with an unwavering fire, and he stared at Galfarion without flinching, his response full of conviction, as if it were the only possible truth. "The dragon god, Orsted. I will kill him." Everyone in the hall recognized the words dragon god, but none of them had ever heard the name Orsted, with one exception. Galfarion, on the other hand, let out a booming laugh. His smile, now fiercer, widened to the point of displaying an almost malicious satisfaction. The other swordsmen present watched the bizarre spectacle with bated breath. The sword god was laughing, but the sword god understood something they did not. If Rigger wanted to kill the dragon god Orsted, that meant he intended to become at least the strongest person in the world. "Ha ha, so you want to kill Orsted, huh?" He looked at Rigger with a playful smile. "And here I was thinking I was the only one who wanted to kill that bastard." He looked back at Rigger, his smile transforming into an expression of challenge and curiosity. Really, compared to the dragon god, I am way outclassed. But hey, talking is easy. He paused, his eyes sparkling. Do you think you can do it? For a moment, silence fell over the ephemeral hall. Without hesitation, Rigger gave his own smile, equally defiant, and replied in a serene tone, yet filled with confidence. If I can't do it, who else could? The corners of the sword god's mouth curled upward. His eyes shone with a newfound appreciation for the young man's audacity. At least you have the courage. Then, Golfarion looked at Ghislaine with a satisfied smile, his eyes filled with silent acknowledgement. He knew his disciple had found a good partner, and he then said to her, Ghislaine, you are still my disciple. As long as you have the will to become stronger, I will train you. But then, his attention turned to Aerys, and he evaluated her with an expression that, although curious, still held a hint of skepticism. But what about the kid? Is she worth it? Aerys could not hold back her reaction. Clenching her fists, she said loudly, My name is Aerys. Her voice rang firm and defiant. The sword god looked at her with a mix of interest and amusement. He nodded to one of the sword saints present, smiling. All right, let's see what you've got. Lionel, fight her. Immediately, one of the sword saints stood up. Lionel was a tall man, with an imposing presence and an aura of experience that shone as he prepared for the fight, his eyes fixed on Aerys with a confident smile. Aerys drew her sword with the same energy and strength she always demonstrated and attacked without delay. Lionel was an experienced warrior and already anticipated the strike. The clash of the blades reverberated through the hall, and the battle began. She was far from a novice. With every movement, Aerys demonstrated skills that put Lionel to the test. Her strikes were fast and precise, and her endurance was impressive. For a moment, it seemed she might win. She resisted bravely, her sword slicing through the air with the precision of an experienced warrior. But the level difference between her and Lionel was evident. Murmurs intensified among the practitioners. After all, Aerys was only 12 years old, yet she fought with such mastery against a sword saint. It was a true display of strength. Until finally, Aerys was defeated. She quickly got up, panting, but her gaze did not waver. Golfarion observed everything closely, his smile never fading. Then, in an approving tone, he spoke loudly, his voice resonating in the hall. You have talent. You are already an excellent warrior, and you have a good fire within you. He paused, his gaze fixed on Aerys, as if deciding her fate. If you can wield the long sword of light in 3 months, I will accept you as my disciple. Aerys looked at Rigger and Ghislaine in search of confirmation. Both nodded silently, their expressions conveying confidence in her. That ignited an even stronger flame of determination within her. Golfarion then turned to Aisha, who was watching Aerys' stances during the fight intently. The sword god looked at her with an evaluative expression, and for a moment, a shadow of doubt crossed his eyes. I'm not sure if the girl would be compatible with the sword god's style. He looked at Aisha, who was still writing, with a thoughtful gaze. But anyway, she is still too young to train. With that, he finally turned his attention back to Rigger, an intriguing glint in his eyes. Now, Ghislaine mentioned that you defeated her in combat during your matrimonial duel. Golfarion's smile widened even further, becoming almost predatory. Golfarion did not give Rigger time to process his words. Without a second's hesitation, Rigger's senses fired up. His body reacted automatically, his warrior instinct gripping the sword with impressive speed. He drew Tsukikage with the intent to defend himself, his sharpened reflexes reaching the blade before it fully left the sheath. But before he could make the move, something collided with the blade at extreme speed. It was all so fast that Rigger saw nothing. He didn't even have time to activate his demon eye. He didn't see Golfarion draw his sword. He didn't see the movements of the sword god. He didn't see the blade coming toward him. And before he could react, the force of the blow hurled him out of the ephemeral hall, like a projectile fired from cannon. The impact was deafening. Rigger was launched through space like an arrow shot from a bow, and his body was hurled with incomparable force, shattering the structure around him. He only had time to feel a whirlwind of pain from his broken ribs due to the impact before being thrown out of the hall, landing in the debris far away. Galfarian's laughter echoed through the environment, loud and resounding. He did not hold back, laughing gleefully. Ah ha ha! The sword saints, the kings, and the emperors present fell into absolute silence, frozen in shock. They had never seen anyone treated that way by Galfarian. As even the emperors could not see the attack, it is fair to assume that the sword god attacked with full force. That certainly would have killed a guest, right? Ghislaine, on the other hand, remained calm. A muffled sound was heard outside the hall, followed by an abrupt movement, a figure rising from the debris. Her eyes were shining intensely, and a fierce smile was stamped on her face. Rigor was standing, breathing heavily, but intact thanks to a regeneration magic that healed his body. That guy, Rigor thought, his thoughts trying to process what had just happened. He felt a growing wave of respect for Galfarian. He aimed specifically at the blade of Tsukikage when I drew it. If it had been at my neck or chest, I would have been dead before I realized. As the adrenaline subsided, Rigor reflected on the exchange. That kind of precision, that kind of power, he was facing someone much stronger than he had imagined. He set his expectations high, but still, he underestimated the speed of the sword god. And that was great. The stronger he was, the more he would have to teach him. He would surpass him. Inside the hall, the sword saints, the kings, and the emperors were still in shock. Galfarian's laughter filled the space, and he, with a sharp look, spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. Arrange accommodations. From today on, Rigor Dedoldia, you're officially a Sword King. Your training begins tomorrow. The word Sword King reverberated through the corridors of the hall, and for a moment, everyone present fell into absolute silence. Sword King. No student of Galfarian had ever been honored with that title aside from Ghislaine, Timothy, and Clint. For those there, it meant that Rigor was being accepted as Galfarian's most important disciple, who would train him personally. It was something that few could dream of. The idea that someone as young as Rigor had been chosen to be trained by him generated a mix of envy, jealousy, and admiration among those present. Although some sword saints felt a twinge of frustration that Rigor was promoted so quickly to a sword king, no one dared to contest Galfarian's decision. For none of them would dare say they could withstand that blow. None of them thought they would be alive after it. The smiles on the faces of the sword saints slowly faded. There was no longer any room for disdain or provocation. And so, on his first day at the Sword Sanctuary, Rigor was officially declared a Sword King and a disciple of Galfarian, the most powerful swordsman alive. It had been almost 3 years since our leader, Rigor Dedoldia, had set off on his journey toward the Sword Sanctuary. 3 years since I last saw him, leaving behind only his unwavering determination and the responsibility to keep the flame of the Iron Legion burning. Much had changed since then. The Iron Legion, once a regional group of warriors, had become a true large-scale military and organizational force. The Great Forest, full of a variety of races and bestial peoples, also thrived under our protection, becoming a refuge for enslaved races. New members joined the Legion every day, and in the past year, a decisive milestone occurred. One of the first slaves we freed at Zamport, back at the beginning of the Legion's creation, returned. Petrov Jinkan, belonging to the demonic Jinkan tribe, a race with blue skin and black horns, known for its brute strength and extreme combat speed. Thanks to that strength, he was captured as a slave when he was very young and used for all sorts of work that required brute force. When he was freed by Rigor at the time, Petrov spent a few months with us, working and saving money before returning to his home in the demonic continent. But when he returned, he was not alone. He brought with him his entire tribe. Apparently, they were fleeing the persecution of a demon king who dominated the province where they lived, his tribe being hunted and exterminated for treason. With the arrival of the Jinkan tribe, the Iron Legion was for the first time hosting an entire demonic community. And among them was Larov Jinkan, Petrov's father and former leader of the Jinkan tribe. Larov was an imposing presence. Even without a formal title from one of the three styles, it quickly became clear that, in one-on-one combat, no one in the Legion could match him. His skill and strength in battle were something extraordinary, even among our best warriors. If it weren't for one detail, he would continue being the strongest in the Legion. Recently, I managed to face him in a combat simulation. I wasn't alone. My constant companion, Freki, the ebony wolf, now in his adult form, was by my side. Freki was a rank A creature, with speed and strength comparable to young dragons. And I, even without using non-enchanted magic, could already be considered a North Saint, so there were few people I couldn't defeat if I put my mind to it. Together, we managed to defeat Larav. At least, that's what he said. Since then, I began training under his guidance. In fact, many of us did. He was an excellent teacher, with his more than 200 years of combat experience. Personally, I didn't think we truly defeated him. After all, Larav wasn't fighting to the death, and it was 2 against 1, even though everyone seemed to recognize Freki as part of my fighting force. But for all intents and purposes, he acknowledged my victory. And that's how I came to be considered the strongest warrior in the Iron Legion, except, of course, for rigor. As the commander of this division of the Legion, I accepted the title without hesitation. I needed to keep morale high, inspire the young ones, show that leadership was still strong even in the absence of our true leader. I liked Larav, but even so, he was a foreigner for now. I wasn't the only one who had grown in these 3 years. Killian did an impressive job in the Great Forest. Even though we hadn't fought together for some time, I heard reports of his incredible growth. Lilia, Persina, and Lysina also evolved considerably. Moreover, with the unification of the forest races under our banner, hidden talents began to emerge. From different bestial tribes, people with immense potential who had never received proper training were now becoming fighters, healers, strategists. Our strength grew day by day. However, not everything was rosy. A persistent problem was haunting our operations: melees. While I was analyzing reports in my tent, one of my men appeared. It was Tovin, the deputy commander of the Legion's intelligence division. "Commander!" he shouted, calling my attention. "Speak." We were attacked again in Melee's territory. Our forces were captured and killed. The slaves that accompanied the troop were also killed or captured. I frowned. The attacks were becoming more frequent and brutal. "Where are they taking the captives?" "Hillhurt, sir. That's where they're being taken. A regular troop should take 3 days of travel, but we have evidence to believe that this is one of Melee's traps. If we send only regular warriors, we'll just be sending more people to die. And the other high-level force groups? Are they still on mission?" The man hesitated. "Yes, Commander." I closed my eyes for a moment, pondering. He was right. Sending a small group would only increase the casualties. The enemy wanted to provoke us, force us to retreat. After all, their comprehensive military strength was still much greater than ours, since we hadn't had much time since the Legion's creation. I will go personally. Inform Larav, when he returns, not to leave the base without orders. "Understood." "Yes, Commander." I turned around and leapt out of the tent. "Freki!" A howl echoed throughout the base. In seconds, a huge ebony-furred wolf emerged among the trees. Its eyes glowed like embers, and its steps made the ground tremble slightly. I leaped onto its back, and it shot through the forest like a black lightning bolt toward the heart of danger. Our biggest problem was melees. Our initial conflicts with the kingdom had only worsened over the years. The only faction still trying to mediate the situation was the popes, but let's be honest, our expansion throughout the region was not exactly well received by the royal family or the Melees nobles. Especially after we received a tribe of the demonic race into the Legion, many accused us of planning a war, and they accused us of cooperating with the demonic races for that purpose. The Temple Order considered us heretics and hunted us as if we were beasts, while we fiercely resisted their attempts at oppression. The conflict intensified every day, like embers blown by a hot wind. The Instruction Order, initially considered our best chance for an alliance, eventually distanced itself after the Joylor family incident, and even the Church Order, which remained neutral for quite some time, began showing signs of unease. There wasn't much that could be done about it. Our activities were, in fact, aggressive in relation to these established powers. We spread members of the Iron Legion throughout the Mealy's territory, infiltrated strategic regions, and even established forward bases in the Kingdom of the Dragon King and on the Demonic Continent. For a while, these actions were easy to maintain. But then, everything changed with the emergence of the Memory Miko. By looking into someone's eyes, she is able to see a person's surface memories that someone holds in mind. This also extends to being able to see memories related to that subject. And the longer she looks into someone's eyes, the more memories of that person she sees. She allied with the Cardinal's faction, our main opponent. Cardinal LeBlanc sees this opportunity as a divine gift, using it as living proof that God was on their side. Rumors arose that a priest, supposedly close to him, was receiving dreams sent directly by God. This further inflamed the faith of the believers and greatly expanded the power of the Cardinal's faction. With the growing support of the nobility and the covert interest of the royal family, the situation became a pressure cooker ready to explode. The Iron Legion came to be seen as a threat to the stability and faith of the Kingdom of Mealy's. The confrontations intensified. Missions were ambushed. Warriors were captured or killed. The siege was slowly tightening. It was then, a few months ago, that she appeared, Verdia Solarion, the master of my leader, and one of the most incredible people I've ever met. She had decided to leave the Great Forest, but when she learned of the situation, she sought me out personally. Her experienced eyes and calm presence carried an authority that I did not dare question. Her words were simple, yet laden with wisdom. She told me that if the situation continued as it was, a war would be inevitable. She advised us to prepare in advance, to gather supplies, strengthen our posts, and establish evacuation routes for the Great Forest. The Legion had great potential and was already very strong, but we still needed time. Time to grow, consolidate our forces, train our warriors, and establish diplomacy. If a war broke out now, all our trade, meticulously built over the years, especially by Pycak, would suffer an almost fatal blow. Verdia also mentioned that she would set out on a journey to the Demonic Continent in order to contact an old friend, someone who, according to her, could help us if the worst were to happen. Meanwhile, we began to take action. We doubled our patrols. We established hidden stockpiles of supplies. And most importantly, we reinforced our presence in the Great Forest. Our resources came from there, and losing the forest would be like losing the heart of the Legion. But no matter how many decisions I made, no matter how much I pretended to be calm, a part of me couldn't shake one thought. If only Rigger were here, with him by our side, maybe this situation would have already been resolved. His presence inspired courage. His strength instilled confidence. And his ideas were always revolutionary. A kind of insight that could change the course of history with just a few words. Now, I needed to do that in his place, even if it was difficult. If he were here, everything would be easier. But he was not, and until he returned, I was the commander, and I could not falter. Recently, the Iron Legion had reached an important milestone with the creation of a strategic maritime route that connected the territory of the Hobbits directly to the Kingdom of the Dragon King, according to Rigger's orders. The route was still in a testing phase, but it was already a promising start. This new transport line represented a significant change for the Legion, as it would allow us to bypass the vast lands of the Kingdom of Mealy's. This maritime route, once fully operational, would open a safer and more direct way to reach our allies, the Kingdom of the Dragon King and the Central Continent, in addition to strengthening our position in the Great Forest. Besides these major problems that the Legion was facing, there were also some dangerous setbacks that could not be ignored. The rest of the mercenary group, Tezpa stayed from Tyrania, who had ambushed Rigger, had come to Mealy's. In our attempt to neutralize them, I could not go because I was on another mission. So, we designated Waze, one of our most skilled warriors, to eliminate the threat. But the mission was a failure. The two most dangerous mages and the old man managed to escape to Malition, and only the mage of the demonic race was captured, almost dead. From this capture, we obtained crucial information about them. The identities of the mages were Rudius Greyrat and Sylphiette, known by the Legion's Fitoa Survivor Search Group due to the teleportation incident. Basically, they were among the people prioritized in the search for Fitoa survivors. The situation became even more complicated when we learned that Laws himself, one of our most loyal warriors, had died in the fight against these two mages. But the one who had killed him was one of our own, probably because they believed he was helping the opponents. From what we learned from Ways, the warrior who had thrown the blade at Laws was one of those killed by the ice magic of the silver-haired mage, Sylphiette, leaving us without the ability to confront him and ask his reasons. No one else could give us an answer, which only worsened our frustration. The boss had ordered us to look for the mage with the stone helmet and the mage with silver hair, and imprison or kill them directly, probably without knowing their true identities. He did not know how they had lost contact, and they had even become enemies, but he was there to be seen. It was now clear that Rudius was the brother of the leader's disciple, Aisha Greyrat, and Sylphiette was Law's daughter. Despite all that, the fact is that they killed several of our comrades, and Laws was already dead. The fact that they ambushed Rigger in an assassination attempt only increased the gravity of the situation. Because of that, we continued following the orders to capture or kill. But we could not do anything about them now. They were in Melitian, a city that was practically a fortress, completely impenetrable for us, the Iron Legion. Meles, moreover, seemed to have become particularly aggressive in recent weeks, with the Temple Order showing even more relentlessness, trying to annihilate any member of the Legion present in its territory. It was then that the lack of manpower became evident. The Legion, even with its great growth, was not fully prepared to deal with Meles, which had thousands of years of accumulated military might. Even young Rufus, at only 9 years old, was being sent on missions. The need for reinforcements was constant, and tensions grew more with each day. We found ourselves forced to allocate our high-level combat forces to several missions at once, weakening our position on the most important fronts. And that was why I often went to some places personally. Usually, this journey I was undertaking would take several days for ordinary warriors, but riding on Freki, after several hours of high-speed travel, I finally reached my destination. After arriving and investigating, the impression was as I suspected. It was a trap. Even so, I continued. Common traps lose their meaning in the face of absolute strength. After following the clues and going to where our members were supposedly imprisoned, I came across an expected scene. Before me, a well-prepared troop of the Order of the Temple was positioned, and leading them was a renowned warrior in Meles, a water saint. The terrain was set up to encircle us, but, as usual, that did not scare me. Freki and I were unbeatable below the saint level, both due to our extremely rapid mobility and the versatility of non-enchanted magic. I wasted no time with introductions. I got straight to the point. I tried to negotiate with the troop's leader, offering freedom for my capture men and for the slaves who had been taken, so that there would be no carnage. But he remained firm in his position, calling me a demon, and claiming that since I commanded a monster to fight on my behalf, I was one too. The same religious nonsense as always. When words failed, I made the decision everyone expected of me. Freki and I launched the attack. The confrontation was brutal. The warriors of the Order of the Temple were quickly crushed. Their forces were not prepared for the destructive power and mobility of a rank A wolf being directed in full combat, much less for non-enchanted magic. There was no mercy. It was a clear message to anyone who wished to challenge us. The Legion would not easily back down. At the end of the battle, only silence remained. There were a few survivors among our warriors and the slaves, which was good. The roar of the fight still resonated in the air as I observed the remnants of the enemy troop. This was becoming more and more common. With each encounter, violence became more necessary. If we let the enemies escape, they would return with greater force to kill our men and retaliate. There was no longer any room for hesitation. The Legion was preparing for war, and war was about to begin. Every battle, every strike we exchanged, made us stronger, but the cost was increasingly high. Verdia had spoken the truth, and now it was impossible to deny. We were about to enter into a conflict of unimaginable proportions. Rigor can do anything. That was the thought I had etched deep in my chest as an absolute truth. I saw him fight countless battles, and I saw how all of them seemed easy for him. At first, Ghislaine defeated him, but soon he overcame her. And after that, he surpassed everyone who crossed his path. To me, it was undeniable. Rigor was the strongest in the world. Even when he was ambushed by several high-level warriors, he survived and turned the tide. I faithfully believed that there was no enemy capable of killing him, nor any force strong enough to bring him down. And I loved him. I loved Rigor with all my heart. That was why I trained so diligently. I wanted to be by his side. I wanted to be worthy of fighting alongside him. I longed for that. Everyone around me always said I was talented, so I never doubted it. And when I fought the bandits and melees, I proved my talent for the first time. The second time was when I helped save Rigor from the ambush. That was the best feeling I've ever had in my life. After that, Rigor stopped treating me like a child. It was then that I realized I could truly walk beside him. If I became strong enough, I could fight for him with him. I was jealous of my mentor, Ghislaine, when he made her his wife. But at the same time, I was happy for her. It was a strange feeling, a mix of jealousy and joy. So I continued training with everything I had. When I grew up and became stronger, Rigor would accept me too. I was sure of it. My faith in Rigor's strength was unshakable. He was invincible, unstoppable, until we encountered the dragon god. That day, I felt fear, true fear. In that moment, I understood the real meaning of powerlessness. With just one hand movement, he completely neutralized me. Against Ghislaine, he seemed to use some sophisticated technique. Rigor was the only one who managed to strike back, and even wounded the dragon god more than once. Still, Rigor was defeated. Completely. We all were. Idar died. Rigor too. And I couldn't do anything. I could only beg for him to be saved. And to this day, I don't understand. That girl, she suggested healing Rigor. And he did. He healed Rigor, but he did not save Idar. I was in shock. I had never felt so weak. I thought I had become strong, but in the end, I couldn't do anything. I'm still capable of nothing. And now, Idar was dead. I relived that moment hundreds of times in my mind and in my nightmares. The moment when Idar and Rigor died. But even so, Rigor and Ghislaine remained standing. Neither of them seemed to fear. Both were determined. And then Rigor told me. He looked me in the eyes and said that maybe he wouldn't be able to defeat the dragon god alone, but he wouldn't face Orsted alone. He still believed in me. He believed that we could help him. In me, in Ghislaine, and in Aisha. Then he challenged me. He said that I needed to defeat him, but without him using Tuki. He had already said that eventually I would be capable of that if I didn't stop training. So that's what I would do. I would defeat him. I would become worthy of helping him, both in the battle against Orsted and for the rest of my life. We talked a little about the battle against the dragon god, and we discovered that, despite all his strength, he used known techniques. Deadly techniques. He wasn't an absolute being. He wasn't an unbeatable deity. He could be defeated. I think it was on the day I managed to wound Rigor. Even if it was just a scratch, then my nightmares stopped. I stopped being afraid and began to dream, to desire. I dreamed of Rigor, Ghislaine, Skoll, Aisha, and me, all together defeating Orsted, and I dreamed of our life after that. An ambition was born. A goal was set. Rigor said that the dragon god was several times stronger than the sword god. So, my objective was clear. First, defeat Rigor without Tuki. And then, I need to defeat the sword god itself. The Sword Sanctuary was an ancient land, marked by countless legendary battles. In the present, it was the home of the sword god style, but it hadn't always been so. A century ago, that very ground belonged to the water god style. In those days, the leaders of both styles engaged in a duel that went down in history, and the water god emerged victorious, conquering the sanctuary. However, years later, he was defeated by a new sword god, who took back the place. Since then, the sanctuary has belonged to the strongest swordsman of each generation, who carries the title of Sword God and teaches his techniques to the most promising students. The sanctuary was divided into 3 sections. The first was composed of dojos intended for beginner and intermediate swordsmen, generally occupied by children and young people who had traveled there or were the children of veteran swordsmen. The second section housed the advanced level swordsmen. This was the most populous, with warriors coming from the 4 corners of the world. Many of them arrived at the sanctuary feeling stuck and sought here a way to push beyond their limits. And finally, there was the main dojo, the deepest and most restricted section, where only swordsmen of saint level of the sword or higher could train. There, the warriors were supervised directly by the sword god himself. It was in this environment that the true heart of the sword god style pulsed. It had been almost 3 months since Rigger's group had arrived at the sword sanctuary. In the center of one of the training fields of the second section, where the advanced level warriors were, 2 figures dueled fiercely. Aerys, with her long red hair flying in the wind, pressed her opponent with wild speed and aggression. Her adversary was a girl nearly her own size, but with blue hair. It was Nina Farayan, a 13-year-old swordswoman, daughter of the current sword god. Nina had already reached the advanced level in the sword god style, and, since Aerys' group arrived at the sanctuary, had become her main training partner. Aerys didn't stop. She trained tirelessly, interrupting her efforts only to eat or sleep. No matter the weather, no matter the injuries. Daily, she sought out Rigger and asked him to ease her exhaustion with healing magic. Rigger always told her, "You already have the ability to use the long sword of light. You're just holding back." The technique of the long sword of light required absolute concentration. You needed to know how to wield the sword with both hands, in other words, be equally good with both arms. That was because straining the dominant hand would make the blade deviate, even with the slightest involuntary movement. The key was to channel all the battle aura into a single, precise strike, cutting in a straight line. It was simple, but that was the greatest secret of the long sword of light. But Aerys already knew that. Both Ghislaine and Rigger had taught her to train with both hands long ago, preparing her for when she reached that point. She had trained relentlessly, perfecting both her left and right. But even so, she still couldn't master the technique completely. With one final blow, Aerys disarmed Nina, who fell to her knees, covered in bruises and small contusions. The girl moaned in pain, but her gaze remained firm. Aerys approached and knelt beside her. With a smile, she calmly recited, "Divine power is rich and nourishing. It offers the strength to rise again to those who have lost their strength. Heal." A soft light shone in her palm as some of Nina's bruises began to disappear. Nina panted slightly and watched her in silence. Aerys smiled, amused. Again, Nina took a deep breath. After looking deeply into Aerys' crimson eyes, she replied firmly, "Again," and the two returned to training, their bodies exhausted but their spirits indomitable. Aerys intended to leave that place as quickly as possible at first, mastering the so-desired long sword of light rapidly, but things did not go as well as she had hoped. Since arriving at the sword sanctuary with Rigger and the others, this had become her only objective, for by learning it, she would also become a disciple of the sword god and could train with Rigger and Ghislaine. However, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't use the technique even once. Rigger advised that, instead of isolating herself in her own efforts, she should find someone with a similar ability to train with. Aerys, reluctant at first, ended up following Rigger's suggestion. Nina Farayan was the daughter of the sword god and 1 year older than her. Even so, Aerys outclassed her in combat. Nina was incredulous. She had always been the one who defeated those much older than her. The situation had never been reversed. This left Nina extremely shocked at first. She went to speak with Gal Farayan and met Rigger, who was even more absurd, being only her age, but already a sword king. After that, for a few days, she didn't show up for training. But when she returned, she challenged Aerys every time, with pure determination and willpower to surpass her, and thanks to their repeated duels, they eventually became close. Aerys was no longer that aggressive and arrogant girl from a few years ago. Her aggressiveness had been tamed by rigor, and her arrogance had been crushed by everyone around her after the teleportation incident. She had met many talented swordsmen, mages, and warriors on her journey, and after traveling with Rigor's group for so long, she had understood one important thing. Aggressiveness and arrogance would get her nowhere. Moreover, both Rigor and Ghislaine constantly repeated that the sword god style was rational, based on tactical thinking and emotional control. If she wanted to improve, she needed to think. For the past 2 years, that was all she had heard while fighting to advance to the level of Sword Saint. But it was difficult. She knew, from Rigor's own words, that she already had what it took to use the technique. However, for some reason, she still couldn't execute it. So she trained, relentlessly. From time to time, Rigor would come to the dojo where she trained, ask about her progress, and observe the room with eyes that shone in a subtle golden hue. When she asked what that was about, he explained that he used his demon eye to check if there was anyone talented there. That's how he recommended that she train with Nina. Although she was ahead of her, the difference wasn't that great. Moreover, Nina possessed something rare. She seemed tireless and determined to beat Aerys at any cost and didn't give up easily. That was why Rigor pointed her out. He saw talent, but often the greatest motivator would be a rival. That would make them grow even more. After several days of intense training, the two were waiting for the instructor to speak with them. The instructor for both, a middle-aged sword saint with deep scars on his arms, appeared behind them and commented, crossing his arms. "Nina, you still overuse your left arm. Because of that, Aerys always knows that your attacks will lean a little to the left." Nina huffed, frustrated. "And Aerys, your technique is excellent. Theoretically, you should already be capable of using the long sword of light." Aerys frowned. That was becoming an annoying mantra. Everyone said that, and yet she still failed. Before she could shout in frustration, the instructor raised a letter and said, "The Red Wolf sent this to you. He said you must go where this letter indicates." Aerys widened her eyes, surprised. She became excited, but also confused. Why didn't Rigor come to speak with her in person? Why a letter? For a moment, she thought about questioning it, but her impulsive nature spoke louder. "It doesn't matter," she said, skipping with joy. She grabbed the letter with a gleam in her eyes and turned to Nina. "Keep training, Nina. That way, you'll never catch up to me." Nina gritted her teeth, determined, and then jumped to her feet. "Hey, you there!" she shouted, pointing to a young man with brown hair watching from afar. "Let's train." POV, Aerys Greyrat. Following the instructions on Rigor's letter, I went from building to building, and I realized that, in fact, it was a map. A very simple map with several reference points, simple enough that even I could understand it. I was excited. It had been a while since Rigor had come to watch my training. I followed every point on the letter carefully. A tree with a hole at its base, a rock that resembled a fallen tower, and then, further ahead, the path began to narrow until it led me into the middle of a forest. That's where the map ended. I stopped looking around. Only trees, stones, branches creaking in the wind. Could I have misunderstood? I picked up the letter again, trying to see if there was any detail I had missed, but at that moment, I felt a chill down my spine. I dropped the letter and drew my sword in a single motion, just in time to block a strike coming straight for my chest. The dagger's blade clashed against my sword, but the force of the impact sent me flying several meters backward. I felt the air expelled from my lungs as I collided with a tree. With no time to breathe, my body moved on its own. I planted my feet on the trunk and leaped upward, gaining height. I used the momentum to land on the nearest rock. Finally, I saw what was attacking me. It was an ogre. I had faced one before. That green skin, the huge muscles, the absurd height of over 2 meters. But this one was different. It was lean, with longer, almost elven ears. It wielded 2 daggers, and its eyes had a maddened gleam. Still, it was an ogre. Only a different one. A much more powerful one. It lunged before I could think any further. Its strikes came in rapid succession, short and fast, as if it had fought all its life with such weapons. It was hard to keep up. It was bigger than me. Faster. Every defense of mine was met with another attack. And that smile, that damn maniacal smile. But one thing was certain, it did not compare to Orsted. I couldn't run. It would catch me. So there was only one thing left. Kill it. Focus. I told myself. Think. Be rational. My sword moved in a frantic rhythm, trying to keep up with its strikes, trying to find an opening. But it hit me. A knee to the stomach. The impact made my eyes widen and my body buckle. It raised the dagger to plunge it into me. But with a swift movement, I threw snow into its face. The distraction was enough for me to dodge. The dagger grazed my cheek. I leaped back, barely touching the ground, and it was already coming at me again. My stance returned naturally. I didn't have time to ask questions. Things like, why was I there? Why did Rigger send me? Or what creature was this? I wasn't good with that kind of thing. Overthinking got in the way. And there, thinking meant dying. There was only one thing in my mind. Kill or be killed. I advanced. My blade shone. The speed I reached was beyond anything I had done before. The ogre also advanced, and I was faster. I slashed. A clean strike. One of its arms flew through the air, and a spray of blood stained the snow around. It roared, maddened, trying to hit me with the other dagger. I blocked with my sword, and a kick came afterward, which I evaded with a jump. It backed off, retreating, and I slid across the snow, feeling my muscles trembling. But this time I was calm. The tension gave way to clarity. It charged again, running. I exploded in speed. Its dagger cut my arm, leaving a trail of blood, but in that very second, we passed by each other, and its head fell to the ground. I breathed, panting, standing still. My body still on alert. I looked at the lifeless corpse, its mouth frozen in an insane grin. That's when I heard applause. I spun around instantly, sword in hand, but relaxed upon seeing Rigger emerging from the trees, with that smile that always seemed to know more than it should. Skull was by his side, and soon he began to circle around me, as if congratulating me. I blinked, not understanding. Rigger smiled. Congratulations, Aerys. You are now a sword saint. I was in shock. While what? What do you mean? He approached and tousled my hair with his hand. You just used the long sword of light. My mind froze for a few seconds. I looked at him, at the mesmerizing smile, the tail wagging excitedly. Everything about him radiated happiness. My face burned. It literally felt like steam was coming out of my ears. My chest filled with such immense pride that it nearly overflowed. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck in my throat. I ended up lowering my head, shyly, until I realized something. Wait, you sent me here on purpose? I asked, looking at the ground, as if only now connecting the dots. How did you know it would work? Rigger just smiled. That bright, confident smile. Then he took a thick cloak from inside his coat and placed it around me, fastening it carefully. He was very close now. My heart pounded so hard it seemed to echo in the forest. Because it worked with me, he said. I, too, had a block when I was about to reach the saint level. Sometimes, being in a very safe environment is what prevents you from growing. But when you're in real danger, your body has no choice but to improve. I didn't understand everything. Perhaps not even half. But it didn't matter. I was looking into the most beautiful golden eyes I had ever seen, hypnotized, feeling the warmth of the cloak, the touch, and I could only nod, clutching the fabric tightly. That was when he said, "Let's go to the sword god. From now on, you're also his disciple."
Hello, everyone. As we wrap up this video, I want to share a quick note. I have a Patreon account. If you'd like to support me and enjoy on-demand audiobooks, you can become a Patreon member. Alternatively, you can check out my Google Drive link, which has 500+ novel audiobooks available through my Ko-fi or Patreon shop. I appreciate your support.